So do what you want. So with their interests secured, the businesses continued to thrive and expand. But since they got cut so many breaks by the government, very little of their commerce actually ended up benefiting Honduras as a whole. In fact, the national debt of Honduras got so bad that the government ended up not being able to perform a lot of its functions. So in response, the three fruit companies stepped in and said, "No worries, we got this," and decided to basically build the nation's infrastructure for them, including roads, railways, shipping lines, telegraphs, telephone lines, radio towers. They even switched the whole country off to the US dollar. Keep in mind, this wasn't out of the goodness of their hearts. It was mostly just to make their own businesses function more efficiently. But it was helpful either way. Anyway, now, not only did they have total power over their plantations, but also a monopoly over nearly every major industry in the country. Many other Central American nations soon followed this pattern, creating a corrupt sort of symbiosis whereby the fruit companies get huge tax breaks and land grants in exchange for a modernized infrastructure and payoffs to the rich minority. And so, the banana republics were born. Sounds like a pretty sweet gig, right? And it was. For the upper 5% of the populations who happen to hold some direct share in the plantations or shipping lines. For your average Jose, though, life mostly consisted of working on land that wasn't even theirs in exchange for dirt poor wages. So that's how things were for like a decade and a half. At some point, Coyamel was bought out by United, but then Zamore became the owner of the whole thing, somehow, and the Vaccaro company was renamed as Standard Fruit. Then one day, in 1944, the country of Guatemala had a democratic revolution, and the newly elected leader, Juan Jose Arevalo, wasn't happy with how the companies treated his people. So he implemented several reforms, like a minimum wage law and universal suffrage. And while the populace got a lot of benefit out of this, United Fruit most certainly did not. Because more rights for their workers means less profits for the business as a whole. Then Guatemala got a new president, Jacobo Arbenz, and he continued these reforms. And United continued to get the metaphorical shaft until finally, in 1953, they decided to go to the USA for help. Oh, Eisenhower. Yo, what's up? This Jacobo guy, he's making us pay minimum wages. Well, that doesn't sound very good for business. That's not all, though. He's also taking our unused land and giving it back to the people. Does that sound familiar? Oh dear. You don't think. By the way it's looking, Dwight, I'd say he's a dirty, oh god, collectivizing, no, commie. Commie! Commie! Yeah, go get him, Dwight. Holy shit, you actually did it. World Star! And from that point onward, Guatemala was ruled by a series of US-backed dictatorships, all the way up until 1996. This kind of situation happened in several other places and times as well, almost always driven by some combination of red fear and yellow love. I won't give any more details for the sake of time, but that doesn't mean they weren't big deals. So you might be wondering, where did these companies go? Surely the Clan of Banana shenanigans can't still be around today. Well, that's where you're wrong. They're still in operation, just under different names. Standard Fruit changed their name in 1991 to become none other than Dole Food Company. You know, when I was a kid, I used to play a lot of Super Monkey Ball, and I used to wonder, what kind of cruel tyrant would just stick an ape in a ball for their own amusement? Well, now I know. Those bastards. As for United, one day in 1976, their CEO decided he couldn't take the heat anymore, so he jumped out the fucking window. That's a real thing, look it up. Then some other guy bought the company and renamed it to, drumroll please, Chiquita Banana. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. The face you once knew as an innocent, fun-loving dancer/fruit merchant is actually a ruthless tyrant who overthrows democracies and undermines basic human rights for her own profit. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Salmonella, and thank you for watching.
This video was made possible by NordVPN. Click the link below and get an exclusive deal with a huge discount. now. Along with that available PN. You'll be set. Warfleet. The warfare. Easy. After the gigantic battle, We met. Cow.
Now Machia, an arena across the river that staged whole-ass naval battles. The Romans
नमस्कार, वेलकम टू करियर 247। नाउ डोनाल्ड ट्रंप रिसेंटली मीडिया के सामने आए और ऐसी बातें बोलकर चले गए कि पूरा सोशल मीडिया, पूरा इंटरनेट, न्यूज़ आउटलेट्स, हर जगह ना लोग यही चर्चा कर रहे हैं कि क्या ये आदमी पागल हो चुका है। मजाक नहीं कर रहा, लिटरली आप देखोगे पहले तो इंटरनेट पर ना हर जगह ट्रंप आज के समय छाए हुए हैं, क्योंकि जो इन्होंने धमकियां दी है, जो विस्तारवाद की बातें करी है ना, लोग लिटरली यहां पर सवाल पूछ रहे हैं क्या ये आदमी पागल हो चुका है। दिस मैन इज अनवेल। नाउ अनवेल की यहां पर यह बात नहीं करें कि फिजिकली अनवेल, मेंटली अनवेल की बात की जा रही है, क्योंकि ऐसी बातें एक बार को शी जिनपिंग और किम जोंग उन भी शायद ओपनली ऐसे नहीं करते जैसे डोनाल्ड ट्रंप ने बातें कही है कि मैं पनामा कैनाल कब्जा लूंगा, मिलिट्री का यूज करना हो वो भी कर लूंगा, कनाडा को कब्जा लूंगा, इकोनॉमिक फोर्स इस्तेमाल करूंगा और उसके अलावा गल्फ ऑफ मैक्सिको का नाम बदल दूंगा। मतलब आप कह लीजिए विस्तारवाद के मामले में ना डोनाल्ड ट्रंप ने दुनिया को दिखा दिया है कि यूएस चाइना से 1% भी अलग नहीं है। उल्टा यहां पर मुझे कोट याद आती है, बहुत ही फेमस कोट है एब्राहम लिंकन की, मेरे हिसाब से द मोस्ट रिस्पेक्टेबल अमेरिकन लीडर। अब एब्राहम लिंकन ने आज से कई साल पहले कहा था कि अगर एक आदमी का कैरेक्टर टेस्ट करना है, तुम्हें देखना है कि एक आदमी जेन्युइनली कैसा है, अंदर से कैसा है, तो उस आदमी को पावर दो, फिर वो आदमी दिखाएगा अपना असली चरित्र। क्योंकि देखो, कमजोरी मजबूरी में तो हमेशा एक आदमी जकड़ा हुआ महसूस करता है, रूल्स के हिसाब से काम करता है, मगर जैसे ही एक आदमी के पास आती है पावर, तब वो दिखाता है कि वो असली में कैसा है। और डोनाल्ड ट्रंप आज के समय यही दिखा रहे हैं कि सिंस आज के समय इनको कंप्लीट सपोर्ट है इलॉन मस्क का, वर्ल्ड्स रिचेस्ट मैन, बहुत ही जल्द ये यूएसए के प्रेसिडेंट बन जाएंगे। यूएसए के पार्लियामेंट में रिपब्लिकन्स की मेजॉरिटी है, यूएसए का सुप्रीम कोर्ट इनको सपोर्ट करता है, यूएसए की बहुत बड़ी जनता इनको सपोर्ट करती है, डेमोक्रेट पार्टी बहुत कमजोर हो चुकी है। ही इज द मोस्ट पावरफुल अमेरिकन प्रेसिडेंट इन अ वेरी लॉन्ग टाइम। ट्रंप को पता है कि अब ये आज के समय कुछ भी कर सकते हैं, और अब ये दिखा रहे हैं कि जब एक अमेरिकन प्रेसिडेंट को अथाह पावर मिलती है तो फिर वो यूएसए को कैसा देश बनाने की कोशिश करता है। नाउ अभी ये वाला जो वीडियो का पार्ट है, यहाँ पे आप देखोगे एक रिपोर्टर पूछेगा ट्रम्प से कि आप देखिए अमेरिका का विस्तार करना चाहते हो, आप चाहते हो कि यूएसए कनाडा को कब्जा ले, ग्रीनलैंड को कब्जा ले, गल्फ ऑफ मेक्सिको को आप चाहते हो उसका नाम बदल के रख दिया जाए गल्फ ऑफ यूएसए, और फिर नीचे पनामा कैनाल को आप कब्जाना चाहते हो। हर जगह आप चाहते हो यूएसए बस विस्तार करता रहे। आप ये कैसे करोगे? क्या आप वोट करवाओगे कनाडा में कि आपको यूएसए को ज्वाइन करना है या नहीं करना? आप मिलिट्री का इस्तेमाल करोगे, ट्रीटी साइन करवाओगे? आप ऐसा करोगे कैसे? क्योंकि अब ऑब्वियसली ये बात मजाक से बहुत दूर आ चुकी है। जो टोन है, जिस लहजे में आप बात कर रहे हैं और जैसे मैप्स आप पोस्ट कर रहे हो सोशल मीडिया पर, तो आप बताइए किस तरीके से आप ये सब करोगे? और ट्रम्प का जो जवाब है ये मैं चाहता हूं सुने।
Greenland and the Panama Canal, so forth. Can you assure the world that as you try to get control of these areas, you are not going to use military or economic coercion?
No.
And can you tell us a little bit about what your plan is? Are you going to negotiate a new treaty? Are you going to ask the Canadians to hold a vote? What is the strategy?
Yeah, I can't assure you. You're talking about Panama and Greenland. No, I can't assure you on either of those two. But I can say this. We need them for economic security. The Panama Canal was built for our military.
ये एक बहुत ज्यादा डरा देने वाली स्टेटमेंट है। रिपोर्टर ने पूछा कि मिलिट्री का इस्तेमाल करोगे पनामा को कब्जाने के लिए, ग्रीनलैंड जैसे टापू को कब्जाने के लिए? डोनाल्ड ट्रंप ने कहा कि मैं उसको रूल आउट नहीं कर सकता, मतलब कि जरूरत आन पड़ी यूएस मिलिट्री का यूज करूंगा और ये सारे इलाके जल्द से जल्द कब्जा लूंगा। आप सोच कर देखिए, अगर ऐसी भाषा यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स ऑफ अमेरिका के प्रेसिडेंट बोलते हैं, यूएसए जो दुनिया भर में आप कह लीजिए ह्यूमन राइट्स, फ्रीडम ऑफ स्पीच, इंटरनेशनल रूल, इस सब को प्रमोट करता है, अगर वहां के प्रेसिडेंट खुलकर कहते हैं हाँ मैं कब्जा लूंगा, जबकि ग्रीनलैंड जो अभी के लिए बिलोंग करता है डेनमार्क को, उनकी सरकार कह रही है नहीं हम यूएसए का पार्ट नहीं बनना चाहते। जस्टिन ट्रूडो ने भी फाइनली डोनाल्ड ट्रंप का जवाब दिया है और ये कहा है नॉट ए चांस इन हेल, मतलब कभी भी कनाडा यूएसए का पार्ट नहीं बनना चाहेगा, हम मर्ज नहीं करना चाहते कनाडा यूएसए को। तब भी डोनाल्ड ट्रंप कह रहे हैं हमें देखिए चाहिए ये सारे इलाके, हमें कनाडा चाहिए, हमें पनामा कैनाल चाहिए, ग्रीनलैंड चाहिए, और अब तो मोस्ट रिसेंटली देखो इधर आप देख पाओगे ये गल्फ ऑफ मेक्सिको है यूएसए के पास, कह रहे हैं इसका नाम भी बदल कर रखो गल्फ ऑफ यूएसए। एक बार को मैं कहूंगा ट्रंप की बातें सुन के लग रहा है चाइना भी ना इतना जरा विस्तारवाद की बात नहीं करता होगा ओपनली जितना डोनाल्ड ट्रंप कर रहे हैं खुलकर। और देखो पता है क्या है, इंडिया में ना हम लोग काफ़ी सारी चीज़ें नोटिस करते नहीं है दुनिया के बारे में, हमारे खुद के इंटरनली इतने इश्यूज रहते हैं उसमें बिजी रहते हैं, मगर अब अमेरिकन ये बात समझ चुके हैं कि डोनाल्ड ट्रंप इस रास्ते पर चल पड़ेंगे, ये जेन्युइन इनकी पॉलिसी रहने वाली है। और अगर ट्रंप इस रास्ते पर चल पड़ेंगे आप समझ सकते हैं क्या होने वाला है। पुतिन कहेंगे कि ठीक है मुझे कौन रोकता है, रशिया भी विस्तार करेगा, शी जिनपिंग कहेंगे ठीक है हमें कौन रोकता है, जब ट्रंप ये करने को तैयार है हम ऐसा क्यों नहीं करते, चाइना विस्तार करेगा। और आज के समय में सोशल मीडिया पे देख रहा हूं स्पेशली ट्विटर पे और इवन बहुत सारे अमेरिकन फोरम्स पे एक 1942 का बहुत ज़्यादा इनफेमस और काफ़ी कंट्रोवर्शियल मैप है, ये वायरल हो चुका है। इसके बारे में कभी गूगल करना, अभी आपको वैसे दिखाऊंगा ये मैप, इसको कहा जाता है 1942 का न्यू वर्ल्ड ऑर्डर मैप। इधर आप देख पाओगे बहुत सारे लोग आज के समय ये जो मैप है ना ये पब्लिश कर रहे हैं, सेम मैप, न्यू वर्ल्ड ऑर्डर मैप, न्यू वर्ल्ड ऑर्डर मैप, हर जगह आपको ये वाला मैप दिखेगा। अब आप यहाँ पे कहोगे अच्छा ये जो न्यू वर्ल्ड ऑर्डर मैप है इसमें क्या खास बात है, इस पर बाय द वे एक पूरा विकिपीडिया पेज भी एग्जिस्ट करता है। अभी आपको ये मैप दिखाऊंगा कि क्यों 1942 में एक विजन बताई गई थी कि दुनिया ऐसी हो जाएगी, छोटे छोटे जो देश हैं ना जिनका कोई पॉइंट बनता नहीं एग्जिस्ट करने का, ना वो खुद को सपोर्ट कर पाते हैं ना रीजन को कुछ कंट्रीब्यूट कर पाते हैं, वो विलुप्त हो जाएंगे और बड़े बड़े जो देश हैं वो लगातार विस्तार करते जाएंगे। दुनिया में कंट्रीज का नंबर बहुत कम रह जाएगा, बस बहुत कुछ ही चुनिंदा बड़े बड़े देश बचेंगे। ये देश कौन कौन से होंगे ये मैं आपको दिखाता हूं। ये 1942 का मैप है अगेन, बहुत ही पॉपुलर मैप है, ऐसा नहीं है कि किसी ने बना दिया फिर लोग गायब हो गए। दिस इज ए वेरी पॉपुलर पोस्ट वॉर न्यू वर्ल्ड ऑर्डर मैप। नाउ ये वो मैप है, ये आप देख पाओगे यहाँ पर। इस मैप में यहाँ पे आप देख पाओगे जो ट्रंप आज के समय करना चाहते हैं ना, वो ऑलरेडी हो रखा है। इस मैप में बताया गया था कि यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स ऑफ अमेरिका विस्तार करेगा, ग्रीनलैंड यूएसए का पार्ट बन जाएगा, कनाडा यूएसए का पार्ट बन जाएगा, ये सारा इलाका बन जाएगा यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स ऑफ अमेरिका। और एक्चुअली ना सिर्फ कनाडा और ग्रीनलैंड, इवन मैक्सिको, पनामा कैनाल, ये सारा इलाका, ये सब कुछ यूनाइटेड स्टेट्स ऑफ अमेरिका के अंडर आ जाएगा। उस वक्त इंडिया आज़ाद हुआ नहीं था, मगर लोगों को पता था कि इवेंचुअली एक रिपब्लिक ऑफ इंडिया बनेगा। तो इंडिया के बारे में भी ये कहा गया कि रिपब्लिक ऑफ इंडिया जब बनेगा, ये विस्तार करेगा। पाकिस्तान जैसे कंट्री के एग्जिस्टेंस को ही यहां पर कहीं पे एक्नॉलेज नहीं किया गया। जिस इंडिया को एनविजन किया गया था ना यहां पर, इधर आप देख पाओगे ये जेन्युइनली अखंड है। ये एक ऐसा इंडिया है जहां पर नेपाल इसका हिस्सा होगा, भूटान इसका हिस्सा होगा, बांग्लादेश, म्यांमार, इवन थाईलैंड के कुछ इलाके इसके अंडर आएंगे। और इवन अफगानिस्तान और बलूचिस्तान का जो ये इलाका है, ये भी एक फेडरेटेड फॉर्म में फेडरेटेड रिपब्लिक्स ऑफ इंडिया का पार्ट होगा, एक नया देश, द फेडरेटेड रिपब्लिक ऑफ इंडिया। ना ये तो हमने यहाँ पे बात कर ली इंडिया की। चाइना का आप देखोगे तो चाइना को इन्होंने कहा था कि यूनाइटेड रिपब्लिक्स ऑफ चाइना सामने आएगा। इसमें ऑब्वियसली चाइना विस्तार कर लेगा, वियतनाम, बहुत सारे आसियान देश, इवन थाईलैंड, सिंगापुर, इवन इंडोनेशिया का कुछ पार्ट, ये सब कुछ चाइना में मर्ज हो जाएगा। इवन नॉर्थ कोरिया, साउथ कोरिया, ये दोनों भी चाइना के पार्ट बन जाएंगे। यूके और ऑस्ट्रेलिया, ये दोनों वापस एक सिंगल कंट्री बन जाएंगे और एक ब्रिटिश कॉमनवेल्थ ऑफ नेशंस फिर से सामने आएगा और ये भी विस्तार करेगा। इंटरेस्टिंगली इस देश में दिखाया गया कि श्रीलंका इंडिया की जगह इस ब्रिटिश कॉमनवेल्थ ऑफ नेशंस का पार्ट होगा। यहां पर यह भी दिखाया गया कि रशिया भी विस्तार करेगा, क्योंकि रशिया के पास अब कोई रुकावट होगी नहीं। रशिया मंगोलिया कब्जा लेगा, रशिया ईरान कब्जा लेगा, अफगानिस्तान का कुछ हिस्सा कब्जा लेगा, सेंट्रल एशिया कब्जा लेगा रशिया, इवन ईस्टर्न यूरोप, पोलैंड, बहुत सारा जर्मनी का इलाका, हंगरी, ये सभी इलाके, इवन फिनलैंड, ये सब कुछ रशिया के अंडर आएंगे। और नीचे अफ्रीका भी एक सिंगल कंट्री बन जाएगा, द यूनियन ऑफ अफ्रीकन रिपब्लिक। साउथ अमेरिका एक सिंगल कंट्री बन जाएगा। और इस तरीके से दुनिया में आप कह लीजिए 50 से भी कम देश बचेंगे। तो यहाँ पे अब आप समझ गए होंगे कि ये वाला जो मैप है, ये इतना ज़्यादा आज के समय वायरल क्यों हो रहा है, लोग लगातार इसको शेयर क्यों कर रहे हैं। क्योंकि ट्रंप की जो सोच है, जिस विचारधारा से ये आगे बढ़ रहे हैं, लग रहा है कि ये पोस्ट वॉर वर्ल्ड मैप की तरफ ये बढ़ रहे हैं, उसकी तरफ ग्रेविटेट कर रहे हैं। ऑब्वियसली ट्रंप के माइंड में जो भी होगा, ये कहीं से भी ऐसा नहीं है कि रैंडमली आ गया। इन्होंने कुछ एक जियोपॉलिटिकल थ्योरी पढ़ी होगी, कोई पुराने मैप्स, कॉन्सेप्ट्स देखे होंगे दुनिया के, कि क्यों ना हम दुनिया को इस तरीके से रच दे तो कैसा होगा। और अगेन, ऐसा नहीं है कि किसी आइडिया को 100% आप इंप्लीमेंट कर सकते हो, बट उसकी तरफ आप बढ़ सकते हो, कोशिश कर सकते हो कि जितना उसको आप रियलिटी में कन्वर्ट कर पाओ उतना आप करें। तो डोनाल्ड ट्रंप जो आज के समय कर रहे हैं, दिस इज वेरी कंसर्निंग। इससे रशिया, चाइना, कई देशों को फ्री हैंड मिल जाएगा कि अगर यूएस खुल के बात कर सकता है तो हम क्यों नहीं। हमारे पास भी मिलिट्री है, हम भी बड़े देश हैं, हमें कौन रोकता है। तो दिस इज क्वाइट डेंजरस एंड आई होप कि एक टाइम पे आकर यूएन या एटलीस्ट कुछ यहाँ पर एक अंकुश लगे। नहीं तो मैं आपको बता दूं, दुनिया में लार्ज स्केल कॉन्फ्लिक्ट हो सकती है, जिसकी शुरुआत इवेंचुअली एक ग्रेटर अमेरिका से ही होगी। और फाइनली यहाँ पे मैं आपसे एक क्वेश्चन पूछूंगा। क्वेश्चन ये है कि हाल ही में माइक्रोसॉफ्ट ने अनाउंस किया है कि ये एक मेगा $3 बिलियन की इन्वेस्टमेंट करने वाले हैं एक कंट्री में। किस सेक्टर को लेकर? आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस और क्लाउड इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर को और ज़्यादा मजबूत करने के लिए $3 बिलियन की मेगा इन्वेस्टमेंट करेगा माइक्रोसॉफ्ट। किस देश में? ये है यहाँ पे आपकी ऑप्शंस, चाइना, रशिया, इंडिया या ब्राजील। कमेंट सेक्शन में करिए उत्तर। जो लोग देंगे सही आंसर, उनकी कमेंट को मैं दे दूंगा हार्ट, ताकि बाकी लोग समझ पाएं कि सही उत्तर क्या है। और फाइनली आप लोगों के लिए एक बहुत ही इंपॉर्टेंट मैसेज, अगर आप सोशल मीडिया पर मुझसे जुड़ना चाहते हैं ताकि मेरी वीडियो शॉर्ट्स की नोटिफिकेशन सबसे पहले आपको मिले, तो इसका बेस्ट तरीका है मुझसे जुड़िए टेलीग्राम और इंस्टाग्राम पे। मैं x.com ट्विटर पे नहीं हूँ, मेरा कोई अकाउंट नहीं है वहाँ पर। और यहाँ पे आप देख पाओगे वीडियो के कमेंट सेक्शन में।
In the heart of Manhattan, New York, there stands a building which conceals its past. This is 22 Vanderbilt, a fairly nondescript modern office tower that houses various PR and tech firms. But beneath this glass and granite facade, there lies another structure, a relic of a bygone era. It is the iron skeleton of the Biltmore Hotel, New York. Once a splendid and widely celebrated luxury hotel that operated from 1913 until its demise in 1981 when it turned into the building we see today. The hotel had magnificent ballrooms and rooftop gardens, a Turkish bath, and an elaborate clock in the Palm Court, which was famous as a meeting place for everyone from writers such as J.D. Salinger and F. Scott Fitzgerald to the countless young students who frequented the hotel. Zelda and F. Scott Fitzgerald were even once kicked out of their hotel room, bath still running, after their honeymoon party became too riotous, disturbing the other guests. Reporter Christopher Gray describes the hotel saying, "The Biltmore, and in particular its clock, became almost as much an institution as Grand Central itself. And it is here in the Grand Cascades Ballroom, one evening in May 1941, that we encounter a figure central to this story. It was the inaugural dinner of Pen in Exile, a group of German writers who had fled their homeland to escape the horrors of the Second World War. Among them was one of the most celebrated and widely published authors of their time, Stefan Zweig. Zweig, who was Jewish, had fled Vienna, Austria just 8 years prior to this evening in May. Many of the authors spoke that night, but according to reports, none so moved the audience as the short speech given by Stefan Zweig. He spoke of his shame and sorrow for what was happening in Europe. He spoke of the Nazi uprising as an almost metaphysical threat, not just to himself and others, but to his language, which as a writer he held very dear. George Prochnik, in this book, The Impossible Exile, recounts part of his speech. "We writers of the German language feel a secret and tormenting shame because these decrees of oppression are conceived and drafted in the German language, the same language in which we write and think. I feel it is my duty publicly to ask forgiveness of each of you for everything which today is inflicted upon your peoples in the name of the German spirit." 50 years later, the Biltmore Hotel, New York, was replaced by the Bank of America Plaza.
To him who has often told the tales of others, many tales will be told. Sorry.
Our story continues here at 6 Rue Princesse Saint-Germain, Paris. This is the former location of the Village Voice bookshop, which closed on July 31st, 2012. The owner of the shop was Odile Helly. She was the daughter of a French army officer who escaped a German POW camp to join the resistance during the Second World War. Sometime before its closing, director Wes Anderson walked into this very Wes Anderson-looking bookshop and was introduced to Stefan Zweig when he picked up this book, Beware of Pity, and started reading. "To him that hath, to him shall be given." These words from the scriptures the writer may safely restate as, "To him that hath told much, to him much shall be told." Nothing is further from the truth than the only too common notion that the author's fantasy is incessantly at work within him. To the person who has over and over again tried to trace human destinies, many tell their own story. Wes was so engrossed that he stood in the bookshop reading for 45 minutes before he finally purchased the book and left. What so captured his attention was the way Zweig framed the story as a series of nesting encounters that ended with the book's fictional author meeting a character who told the author his life story. It was this framing device that ended up becoming the inspiration for the opening sequence of the Grand Budapest Hotel.
It is an extremely common mistake. People think the writer's imagination is always at work, that he's constantly inventing an endless supply of incidents and episodes.
Who wouldn't? At the Grand Budapest, sir. It's an institution.
The Grand Budapest Hotel is Wes Anderson's 8th feature film. It's so far his most financially successful and his most widely acclaimed. It won 4 Oscars, and it felt like a marked step forward in his already iconic personal style. There's so much I could talk about with this film. The exacting precision of the plot and its pace, the way it seems to unfold like a mechanical snow globe music box, each piece fitting together with the confidence of a practiced storyteller. People have talked endlessly about the beauty of its color palettes, set design, and costume design, and of course I could talk about the many beautifully constructed shots in the film or the quality of performance from Ralph Fiennes as Gustav H. I myself love this movie. I've seen it countless times, including the director's commentary twice. I've read the screenplay and the companion book put together by film critic Matt Zoller Seitz. I could tell you the Easter eggs. I know that Willem Dafoe's boots are custom Prada. I know that the size of the boy with apple painting is different in this scene than it is in this scene because Wes Anderson thought it looked better to have Saoirse Ronan carrying a smaller painting. I could point out how the window in the prison cell is a different shape in this shot than it is in this shot. I could tell you that Harvey Keitel lived for a few days with his cellmates in this prison cell in preparation for their scenes. I could tell you that all the monks' heads were shaved in this scene despite the fact that they all ended up covered. I could show you the image of the hotel that inspired the Grand Budapest Hotel itself, that of Hotel Pup in Karlovy Vary, Carlsbad from the Library of Congress Photochrome collection. I could talk about how I think this movie is at least partially responsible for the popularization of using multiple aspect ratios as a storytelling technique, which when this movie came out with its 4 aspect ratios wasn't that common, but which now is a fairly widely accepted way of showing different periods of time or different perspectives in both film and television. I've talked in the past in another video about the extent to which the movie draws on references to other filmmakers and films, quietly presenting itself as a fairly thorough pastiche of films set in European hotels. There's so much beautiful detail and technical handiwork on the surface of this film to admire that I think in many ways the real heart of the film, the beauty that lies in a story that at first seems equal parts distant and fantastical, actually has a sort of universal resonance. I think the Grand Budapest Hotel has been as successful as it has been, not just because of the film's visual novelty, but in fact because of the depth and sincerity that lies beneath the film's Mendel's-esque sugarcoating. In the Wes Anderson collection book about the film, Matt Zoller Seitz describes the film's emotion as something that unfolds with multiple viewings, and this is something that I've found to be true for myself as well. On the first watch, it's very easy to be caught up in the pretty lights of this madcap action mystery caper. When the film's emotional moments do come, they are quick and stabbing.
In the end, they shot him.
And they are gone almost as quickly as they arrive. I wasn't moved by the movie the first time I saw it, and detractors of Wes Anderson's work often find it somewhat emotionally distant. But as you revisit the film, I think its underlying melancholy becomes more apparent. When you know Zero and Agatha's story is going to end like this,
She and our infant son would be killed 2 years later by the Prussian grippe, an absurd little disease.
the brief moments where older Zero talks about her earlier in the film becomes more poignant. When you know the finality of Gustav's trajectory, there's a more apparent loneliness in his character from the start. The emotional subtext is there, it's just when you don't know what you're looking for the first time around, it's easy to get lost in all the... And of course, this splicing of moments of striking emotion into what feel like otherwise unassuming, quirky comedies or adventures has been part of Wes Anderson's MO from the beginning. This move is part of the hidden beauty that I'm talking about, but it's not all of it. I think the real thing that makes the Grand Budapest Hotel Wes Anderson's most unique and successful film lies deeper than that. As the film opens, we see a young woman who we never learn anything about, but what we do know is that she's been so moved by the book she's reading that she makes a pilgrimage to visit the statue of an author. I think what the Grand Budapest Hotel is really about on its deepest level can only really be understood by understanding the life of the author whose work the film is inspired by, Stefan Zweig. One of the things we quickly find when reading Stefan Zweig's description of his hometown Vienna in his memoir, The World of Yesterday, is that his description of the place has a similar quality to the way the Grand Budapest Hotel and the country of Zubrowka are portrayed through the perspective of Gustav H. in the movie. The movie's immaculate representation of the past isn't just a fun novelty. It also serves the purpose of actually embodying the fantastical nostalgia and almost hopelessly rose-tinted image of the past that both Zweig and Gustav share. For Zweig, Vienna wasn't just ideal in its aesthetic beauty. He describes a cultural atmosphere of progressive optimism, one that appreciated arts and culture, valued humanity, tolerated differences, and felt secure and peaceful. Some of the stories he tells of Vienna speak to this kind of fanaticism of culture and art. There was a famous old theater that had held many performances from famous classical musicians that was going to be torn down. And in protest at the final performance, the entire audience sat silently in darkness and refused to leave. But to understand Zweig, we got to understand that the loss of these places, like the loss of a hotel or a famous concert house, wasn't just about the loss of those physical locations. It was about what losing those things represented. At the turn of the 20th century in Vienna, the way Zweig describes it, polite society wasn't just a nicety. It was a philosophy of life that would finally usher in a modern era of civilized peace.
Rudeness is merely the expression of fear. People fear they won't get what they want. The most dreadful and unattractive person only needs to be loved, and they will open up like a flower.
You can see pieces of Zweig in the author characters Zero and Gustav H. A successful and respected author, someone who had to flee because of the destruction of war, and finally a lover of art, culture, and society, who has to watch the things they love be destroyed by fascist uprising. For him, the rise of fascist Germany, the restriction of freedoms, and the destruction of the city that he loved represented the loss of a specific philosophical ideal and way of life. I think we see this in the speech that he gives at the Penn dinner in New York during his exile. He's not just apologizing for specific events, he's apologizing for something that he sees as a more severe metaphysical or philosophical loss. This whole discussion relates to my last video where I introduced the concept of metamodernism, and you don't have to have seen that video to appreciate this section, but I'm going to expound on those ideas a little bit here. Wes Anderson, I think, is a fantastic example of a metamodern director. And one of the ways I think we can see Wes Anderson's metamodernism shine is in how he interacts with this more postmodern sort of attitude that crops up in some of Zweig's work. In the metamodernism video, I describe how there's kind of this shift from modernism to postmodernism in arts and culture as some of the promises of modernism begin to sour with the world wars and other events throughout the 20th century. Zweig, in his memoir, The World of Yesterday, describes this prevailing modernist sentiment that he experienced growing up in Vienna as having a kind of religious quality. In its liberal idealism, the 19th century was honestly convinced that it was on the direct and infallible road to the best of all possible worlds. The people of the time scornfully looked down on earlier epochs with their wars, famines, and revolutions as periods when mankind had not yet come of age and was insufficiently enlightened. Now, however, it was a mere matter of decades before they finally saw an end to violence and evil, and in those days this faith in uninterrupted, inexorable progress truly had the force of a religion. People believed in progress more than in the Bible, and its gospel message seemed incontestably proven by new miracles of science and technology that were revealed daily. This was the feeling of optimism that Zweig was watching be destroyed by the wars, and he describes the feeling of that loss quite viscerally. We long ago ceased believing in the religion of our fathers, their faith in the swift and enduring ascent of humanity. Having learnt our cruel lessons, we see their overhasty optimism as banal in the face of a catastrophe that, with a single blow, canceled out 1,000 years of human effort. The Grand Budapest Hotel isn't just about personal or material loss and the grief of that loss. It's also about the loss of idealism. I think it's maybe easy to see both Gustav H. and Zweig as a little bit hopelessly idealist and nostalgic, and the perfect vision they had of society was never that truly perfect.
To be frank, I think his world had vanished long before he ever entered it.
But I think this exaggerated kind of nostalgic representation of the past and that feeling of loss does tap into something that a lot of us do experience. And I think a lot of us succumb to a kind of nostalgia or idealism, whether for the past or the future, more than we care to admit. And so it's in this way that I think the Grand Budapest Hotel takes on a kind of archetypal representation of this loss of idealism that we maybe don't experience in the very extreme version that someone like Stefan Zweig experienced, but which we inevitably experience as part of our everyday lives. And I think these losses that are in the past have more ongoing relevance to our lives than we might think.
Stand clear, please. Stand clear, everyone.
Listen to this.
Contact!
That's the sound of a German bomb from World War II exploding. During the production of Fantastic Mr. Fox in London, an unexploded bomb from the Blitz was found in a canal next to the production studio. Production had to be shut down for a few days so that the bomb could be safely detonated. And when it was, Wes Anderson and the crew recorded the sound and then ended up using it in Fantastic Mr. Fox. You might not be living in Vienna in the 1900s watching it be destroyed by war, or the concierge of a grand hotel watching it be stomped by fascist goons. You might not be a war refugee losing your young wife to an absurd little disease. But you do live in a world that is still tangibly grappling with the loss and fallout from major wars that were happening only a few generations ago, even as we continue to deal with our own loss and change. In 2023, cultural optimism has been on a decline for what feels like about a decade for a lot of reasons. And I think the fact that the Grand Budapest Hotel speaks to those feelings and came out in 2014 is part of its success. Grief is often a recognition of something beautiful being taken from us. Without any beauty or goodness, there is no sadness in the loss of that thing. This is why the movie's beauty goes hand in hand with its discussion of grief and loss. That discussion wouldn't be as powerful if it didn't portray something being lost so beautifully. In this way, it mirrors another film that I love about the Second World War, A Hidden Life. The way Terrence Malick captures in this movie the absolutely stunning beauty of the Austrian Alps with a kind of idyllic perfection sets up the pure horror of that ideal being destroyed by the war.
Why are we stopping at a barley field again?
I find these black uniforms very drab.
But there's one more ingredient to this movie and how it handles these themes. We all deal with loss or grief in our lifetime, and when we lose things, it hurts. And a lot of times, as humans, as people, we don't feel comfortable talking about our pain, our grief, or our hurt. And so we kind of have this tendency to bury that pain in stories. And stories are also a way we try to capture and hold on to what was lost in the past and bring it into the future. In the end, Zweig's exile was too much for him to bear. But Anderson brings a metamodernist view to the despair of Zweig's life. The film begins and ends with a monument to the author, not Zweig explicitly, but almost to the concept itself, because stories are one way what is lost can live on. Just as Mustafa maintains the hotel in memory of Agatha, we can maintain some connection to a past we've lost through storytelling. When we understand that the world we live in is one of constant and inevitable change, and that change almost always comes with a sense of loss, and that we're grappling with the echoes and residues of losses in our past, even as we deal with losses in our present, and when we understand that stories and storytellers are ways of trying to keep and maintain the things we've lost, even while they're painful reminders of what we've lost at the same time, then we begin to understand the hidden beauty of the Grand Budapest Hotel. When doing research about Wes Anderson's films, one of the things that I constantly come across is that for an American director, he's been incredibly and deeply influenced by all kinds of international filmmaking. When he talks about his favorite films, they're almost always movies from France, India, Japan, Germany, or other places all over the globe. One of the best places that you can watch international cinema is with my sponsor for this video, Mubi. Mubi is an online, hand-curated streaming service with exceptional films from all around the world. They're constantly adding films all the time with an explanation of why it's worth your time, so it's a great place to find new and interesting stuff to watch that you can't find anywhere else. I also want to mention their podcast, which is a great resource for learning more about the behind the scenes of filmmaking. Their third season is called The Needle on the Record, and it covers the use of music in film and famous needle drops. They talk about movies like 2001: A Space Odyssey and Donnie Darko. You can check that out wherever you get your podcasts. Go to Mubi.com/ThomasFlight to get an extended 30-day free trial of Mubi to start exploring wonderful international and classic cinema today. Mubi.com/ThomasFlight, or click the link in the description below for your 30-day free trial of Mubi. Thanks again to Mubi for sponsoring this video.
So, you have a movie for me? Yes, sir, I do. So it's based on this fantasy book series, right? Which has sold a lot of copies. Oh, okay. Sorry, I got bored by the word book there for a second, but I'm listening now. So what's this series about? Well, it's called Harry Potter, sir, and it's about this kid called Harry Potter. I understand completely. And so this evil wizard Voldemort tried to kill Harry and his parents when he was a baby, right? But not only did Harry survive, it seems like he killed Voldemort. Oh, retaliatory babies are tight. Actually, he was like protected by the power of his dying mother's love. Oh, his mother's love is tight. Oh, I don't know about that sentence. I don't love how it sounded either, but I said it and there's no taking it back. So anyway, we're gonna meet this wizard Dumbledore, right? And he wants to leave baby Harry with his non-magical family, but he doesn't want to be seen doing magic in the suburbs. So what does he do? He does some magic in the suburbs. He turns all the streetlights into flying magic balls and zips them down the street at him. Ah, you know, I think walking down the street normally might have drawn less attention than the magic flying light balls. Maybe. So Dumbledore's gonna explain to these other wizards, Hagrid and Professor McGonagall, that Harry's gonna be famous in the wizarding world, so it's better for him to grow up away from all that. I guess that's better. So he's like, let's just leave Harry in an abusive family for a decade and then kind of spring all this on him when he's a 10-year-old. And that's better than growing up rich and famous. That's what Dumbledore's going with. So then Harry's about to turn 11 and he starts receiving letters from this magic school called Hogwarts, where Dumbledore's the headmaster. Okay, but his family, they don't like him. They don't want him to read these letters. Why not? Because they hate him so much they want to keep him around. I don't know. That works. So the uncle keeps destroying these letters and they keep showing up, but Harry just can't get his hands on one long enough to read it. Wow, well, it's too bad they don't have a magical letter that just kind of shouts the message at you. Well, no, actually they do have that. Those are called howlers. Oh, sounds like maybe they just could have sent him one of those. Well, we don't introduce them till a future movie, so that's as good as them not existing right now. That makes sense. So anyway, then that Hagrid guy shows up and tells Harry that he's a wizard and takes him away from his family. Very exciting. So Hagrid brings him to get all the stuff he needs for school, like he gets an owl named Hedwig. Oh, Hedwig. Yeah, he's super cute. Don't get too attached. What? Oh, and also Harry has to get a wand, right? So he goes to this place called Ollivander's and just destroys the place. Does he get in trouble? No, that just kind of seems like this guy's way of doing things. Just let children destroy his stuff until they find a wand that works. Interesting business model. So anyway, eventually Harry gets on the train to Hogwarts and he meets this kid Ron Weasley and he's got a rat on his crotch. Oh my God. Oh yeah, no, it sounds gross, but in a later movie we're gonna find out that the rat is actually a middle-aged man disguised as a rat. Oh, that's so much worse. Oh yeah, I guess that is worse. Anyway, turns out Ron's poor, so Harry buys all the candy on the cart for just the two of them. Okay, kind of a jerk move actually. What if the other kids on the train wanted some candy? Well, that's too bad, because Harry's rich and rich people get what they want. That is true, yeah. And then they also meet this know-it-all Hermione and they get to Hogwarts together. Oh boy, and what happens happens there? Well, this Draco Malfoy kid wants to be Harry's friend, but he's super mean to Ron, so Harry's like, no thank you. Oh, okay, that's a nice move. Yeah, so he chooses to be friends with Ron instead, who's so mean to Hermione that she cries in a bathroom. Oh my god. So then all the new students get sorted into these 4 houses, one of which is just for the evil kids. Why would they have that? And then the school year begins. Wow, so what kind of stuff are they gonna do? Oh, just all kinds of life-threatening things. Oh, very dangerous. They also celebrate Christmas. Wizards celebrate the birth of Jesus Christ. Yeah, even though a lot of his miracles are things they learn as 11-year-olds, turns out the wizarding world developed the same religious practices as non-magical people. Huh. So anyway, throughout the movie, they start suspecting that this evil-looking Professor Snape is after this magical stone. Oh, is it magical? Now, this freaking thing can make you immortal, and they see Snape doing kinda sketchy things, so they think he wants to bring Voldemort back to life. What kind of sketchy stuff? Like at a certain point, it seems like he's trying to make Harry fall off his flying broomstick, so Hermione sets him on fire. Holy, she just straight up murders a guy? Not just like his robe, it's okay. Oh, okay. But at the end of the movie, we're gonna find out it was actually this Professor Quirrell guy who was trying to jinx the broom, and the fire made him lose his eye contact. Why didn't he just restart the jinxing after the fire was out? I don't know. Fair enough. So eventually they find out that the stone is actually in Hogwarts, and a bunch of professors put spells to try to keep it safe. Okay. And so Harry and Ron and Hermione, they decide they need to stop Snape from getting it. So what are some of these challenges? Well, the first one is a giant 3-headed dog that you need to get past to get into this little trap door in this little room. They kept a dog locked in a room for a full year? That's kind of messed up. No, it's not. Oh, okay. And then there are gonna be a couple more, like a giant chess game where you have to sit on the pieces and you get attacked. Oh. Yeah, and so Ron falls from like 3 feet in the air, and then he's, you know, just kind of a big drama queen about it. Very dramatic. So now Hermione has to help Ron, and Harry carries on by himself. And how does that go? Well, he ends up finding Professor Quirrell standing in front of this mirror trying to figure out how to get the stone out of it. Oh, okay. And then he reveals that he's actually had the Dark Lord Voldemort's face under his turban this whole time. Oh. Must have been very awkward for him to poop all year. Yeah, no, can't imagine those were pleasant for either of them. You think he ever went to scratch his head and accidentally poked the Dark Lord in the eye? You know, maybe. You think they said goodnight to each other before bed every night, or was it just awkward silence? I don't know. Maybe let's not think about this too much. Oh, okay. Anyway, so then the stone magically appears in Harry's pocket because of the magic mirror. Oh, wow, wow, wow. Wow. So now Professor Quirrell comes after him. Oh man, it's gonna be tough for him to defend himself against a full-grown man and the tiny face of a dead man. Actually, it's gonna be super easy. Barely an inconvenience. Oh, really? Yeah, it turns out his mom's love is like super plot armor, so he turns Professor Quirrell to dust just by touching him. Oh my god, he kills a teacher? He does, yeah, and so that's a happy turn of events. This child took this man's life very easily. Jeez. So then Dumbledore explains to Harry that this mirror had a spell on it where the stone would only transfer to somebody who wanted to find the stone but not use it. So that's why Professor Quirrell couldn't get it. Exactly. Wow. So all the other challenges were kind of unnecessary, huh? Yeah, kinda. And you know, arguably, Harry made the situation much more dangerous by showing up. The stone would have stayed in the mirror. It never would have been within Voldemort's grasp. Yeah, okay, well, we're gonna play the moment as heroic, okay? Yeah, I guess. So anyway, then it's the end of the year, and there's this thing called the House Cup, where like throughout the year, each house gets points and loses points based on the stuff they do. Okay, and the good guy house, Gryffindor, is dead last, and the bad guy house, Slytherin, they win. Oh, well. You know, bummer. Yeah, but then Dumbledore, he's like, hey, everybody, shut the hell up, because Harry Potter here killed one of the teachers with his bare hands. Yeah. So he gives Harry and all his friends a bunch of points for killing that man, you know, ending that guy's life, being the last face he ever saw. I imagine this is phrased better in the book. Yeah, I think, probably. All right. Oh, and also Dumbledore spoke with this guy, Nicholas Flamel, who was being kept alive by the stone, and he agreed to just die and let the stone be destroyed. Oh. Yeah, the guy's been alive for like 600 years, so he's like, yeah, okay, destroy the stone. I've lived long enough. Probably should have had that talk in the first place before storing the stone at Hogwarts and endangering all the students. Maybe. So then Harry gets on the train to go home and waves like a normal person. What are you talking about? The way he waves? It's perfectly normal. Okay, I mean, person. What are you talking about? The way he waves? It's perfectly normal. Okay, I mean, yeah, all right. So then that's it. What do you think? Well, you know, it sounds like a pretty good time. What's this first movie called anyway? Like, what's the full title? Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. Oh, okay. And also Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, because that first one I said's kind of hard. Wait, what? So, you have some new Harry Potter for me? Yes, sir, I do. So the Dursleys have this very important business dinner, right? And Harry...
Hey kids, do you ever feel like life has passed you by? Does the daily grind leave you feeling trapped in your own life like an animal in a cage? Well, that doesn't mean you can't enjoy some fun facts about livestock while you're at it. Today, I'll be giving a tour of the life, death, and processing of the American beef cattle. Disclaimer, this video is only a basic summary of some common industry practices. No two farms are alike, some are nicer, some are worse. I'm not a shill, please don't get mad at me. Now, in the beginning, there was nothing. And then God said, "Let there be light." And it was good. Henceforth, you shall be called Craig. At birth, the calf weighs somewhere between 60 and 100 pounds. The males are typically castrated within the first couple of weeks, usually without anesthetic. The main point of this is to keep the steers mellow later in life, but it also stops their male hormones from giving the meat an off taste that the American palate isn't really accustomed to. Anyway, things started off pretty good for Craig. Drinking milk, hanging out, the life. After a while he figures out you can eat the floor, that's cool. But then after about 10 months, he gets loaded into the cattle cars. If you're a history buff like me, you know that's not a good sign. Little does Craig know, he's been auctioned off to a feedlot 1,000 miles away. Here the cattle are packed together like sardines, if sardines were 500-pound terrestrial mammals. The menu consists of random roughage and energy-dense feed like corn so they can pack on the pounds more quickly. Overall, this environment puts a good deal of stress on the beast, which can end up taking a toll on his health. But it's nothing a little visit from the antibiotics fairy can't fix. Once fully grown, Craig gets taken to the packing plant. This is where the magic happens, and by magic we mean mechanically automated goring into commodities. This is where things get messy, so try to forget that we gave this random animal a name a minute ago. In order to keep things as humane as possible, a worker will first use this device, referred to as a stunner. Here's a demonstration. This renders the beast instantly unconscious, or worse, but potato at this point. Its ankle is then attached to a conveyor rail, which will gently guide the animal along the rest of its journey. First, the cow gets to talk to this man. He's called the sticker. Can you guess what he does? If you said that he gouges out throats for a living, you'd be correct. Over the course of about a minute, the flow goes from torrential downpour to incontinent poodle, by which point our beloved bovine can continue on his way. At the next station, the cow is subjected to high voltage electrical stimulation. Hopefully the nervous system is all out of steam by this point, but if not, the boys on the killing floor will have a great story to tell their wives. Haha, just kidding. The FDA estimates that 93% of meat worker marriages are in shambles. Who knew that 11 hours of pure slaughter every day could desensitize a man? Anyway, electrical stimulation basically works to speed up the onset of rigor mortis. Getting this process out of the way means the meat won't toughen up once it reaches the freezer. Next, the carcass undergoes a thorough power washing. Like the noble mortician, this hose works to make a lifetime of filth disappear. Unfortunately, though beauty is only skin deep, manure runs to the core, so the cow must be disemboweled to prevent contamination later on. And we might as well get rid of all these other gross bits while we're at it. Then the feds stick their nose in things to make sure everything is as it should be. Yup, it's a cow. Finally, we send it down the line, evacuate the spine, bifurcate the hind, reticulate the spline, and power wash it again just for good measure. This whole process from bashing to slashing to splashing takes a mere 15 minutes to complete. That means it takes the same amount of time to process 3 half-ton mammals and 1 scheduled license renewal. Try puzzling that one out. After hanging out in the cooler for a couple days, the beef is broken down into its many cuts: chuck, loin, sirloin, what have you. This is the good stuff. That'll get shipped off as is to barbecues, bar mitzvahs, and bargain bins all across the country. Then you got all these misfit bits hanging out wherever else. Still technically flesh, so we have machines pluck it off, pulp it, and use it to make hamburgers, hot dogs, and the like. Then all the garbage even Americans can't stomach is sent off to the rendering plant to be made into whatever else. So there you have it. I don't really have an outro except, kinda gross, right? Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Salmonella, and thank you for watching.
Thanks to Dashlane for sponsoring this video. Hey kids, whether you're a precocious young lad down by the swimming hole or a grizzled crime scene investigator, everybody's got some interest in dead bodies. Yes, from Weekend at Bernie's to Weekend at Bernie's 2 to Weekend at Bernie's 3 Revelations, stories about wayward corpses have certainly carved their niche in today's media. So, I thought I'd spin a few yarns about some real-life people who were kept out far past their expiration date. Our first tale follows one Elmer McCurdy. He was an outlaw during the twilight days of the Wild West. Thanks to his former life as a miner, McCurdy acted as the demolitions expert to his little posse, using nitroglycerin basically anytime he had the faintest excuse to do so. Except, he was kind of a moron, so it didn't usually go quite as planned. Gotta say, after peanut butter and chocolate, my favorite combination of two things is probably gross incompetence and high explosives. Example, in March of 1911, McCurdy's band of rabble-rousers found out that $4,000 were in a safe in an approaching train. They managed to stop the entire locomotive, I don't even know how you do that, break in, hold everyone on board hostage, and locate the safe. McCurdy steps up to plate, right? Gotta blast the thing open, except I guess the excitement kinda got to him, because he ended up using like way too much nitroglycerin, like inordinate amounts. Ended up completely destroying the safe and its contents, and what few silver coins they made out with were literally melted to the frame of the safe and had to be peeled off. Anyway, he died in a shootout with police later that year, and the undertaker at the funeral home he was sent to couldn't find any next of kin on account of McCurdy being a rambling low-life varmint, so he just embalmed the hell out of him and said, "Hey boys and girls, want to see a dead criminal? Only one shiny nickel." And since LiveLeak wasn't around at the time, there weren't many places a kid could go to stare at a corpse for a while if he or she so desired, so it actually became a pretty popular attraction. Visitors would pay their dues by physically slipping the coin into the man's mouth, and the creepy-ass undertaker would come fish him out later, probably with bare hands all slowly and sensual-like. A few years passed when a couple of guys showed up claiming to be McCurdy's brothers, with a note from the local sheriff to back it up. They told the undertaker they had permission to go bury McCurdy, so he reluctantly relinquished the body to the men. Except, these guys weren't his brothers. They were just a couple of crusty freaking carnies. They shipped the body off to Kansas to become an attraction in their traveling show. From here, McCurdy traded hands a few more times. At one point, he was exploited for this one guy's film about narcotics. He was like, yeah, this pill-popping degenerate got shot while trying to rob a pharmacy for more dope the other day. The body was super old by then, so people are like, wait, why is he all desiccated and flaky and gross? He just goes, yep, that's what happens when you do drugs, kids. Your fucking skin falls off. Stay above the influence. At some point in his journey, he ended up getting coated in wax and paint to look a little less rotty, before ending up in a warehouse in 1949. Here's the thing, he was in there alongside some actual wax figures, and after spending 19 years in storage, nobody knew he was a real corpse anymore, so he ended up getting sold in 1968 as a mannequin to one Spoonie Singh, owner of the Hollywood Wax Museum. He tried to lend the guy out a couple times during his stay, but people found him too gross or unrealistic looking for whatever purposes they had in mind. So he ended up getting sold again and used as a prop of a hanged man at the Pike Amusement Zone in their Funhouse ride, with zero knowledge that he was an actual dead criminal. It wasn't until 1976, 65 years after his death, that an episode of The $6 Million Man was being filmed at the complex, and a stagehand tried to move the prop around, only to have its arm break off in his hand. He was like, ugh, lousy stiff. Wait a minute, that's curious. This mannequin's got human flesh and bones inside of it. Wait a minute. Uh-oh. The autopsy confirmed what everyone present at the time suspected. By this point, the body was so dried out and stale that it only weighed 50 pounds, which makes me think we should start a radical new fad diet where we just get people to mummify parts of their body. Like, Jenny, guess what? I just lost 30 pounds in 5 days. Wow, holy heck, how'd you do that? They call it the Egyptian cleanse. Anyway, with that, McCurdy was finally laid to rest back in his homeland of Oklahoma, and that film crew's lives were never the same again. Flashback to late 18th century.
Baloney.
There lived a physician by the name of Luigi Galvani. This guy was a big deal. He's the dude who discovered that, hey, animals got electricity in them. And his legacy still survives today in words like galvanize. One of his most famous experiments was the one where he used static electricity to make frog legs twitch on command. Around these parts, we call that the French salute. Haha. Stereotypes funny. Well, in 1803, his nephew, Giovanni Aldini, said, hey, that's pretty nifty and all, but what if we tried it on people? So the city of London was like, hey, now you're thinking with portals. One freshly executed criminal coming up. Aldini gathered a crowd and applied 2 diodes to the corpse's head, causing his face to scrunch up and one eye to flick open. Aldini was a showman though, he wanted some real action, so he then put the current through opposite points in the body, which made the whole thing flail around like Pinocchio in heat. Now today we know he was just exciting the dead muscles, right? But the people who were watching had no idea what was going on, so they were like, Jesus Christ, this guy's a fucking necromancer. Quick, go get grandma, maybe we can get in the will after all. Fun fact, this experiment actually ended up serving as inspiration for Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which makes me wonder what other famous novels were based on real life events. Was a white whale ever pursued by a vengeful sea captain? Was there actually a mentally handicapped migrant worker who liked hugging rabbits to death? Was there ever a human soul as profoundly asinine and willfully ignorant as Amelia Bedelia? God, I hate her glassy-eyed face so fucking much. I just want to mash it into a running waffle maker, be like, ha, isn't that ironic? Grab her by her vacant fucking head, throw her out of a 747 and say, hey, why didn't you shoot yourself when you had the chance? Get it! Anyway, one thing we learned today is the importance of reputability. And just as you wouldn't want some dirty carnies jacking your stiff, phrasing, you certainly wouldn't want the same fate to befall your valuable online information. That's why you need to try Dashlane. Dashlane's been all over the place recently, and with good reason. In this day and age, cybersecurity and privacy have never been more important, and only a select few people have the time, energy, and know-how to keep their data as safe as
What's poppin', my Kingsmen? It is me, MT, and welcome back to the Heavy Spoiler Show, y'all. This is about to be a breakdown for Kingsman: The Secret Service, one of my absolute favorite movies of all time, because I love me some spy movies, and I love me some Matthew Vaughn. That dude is a really creative director. So let's just get into it. Kingsman: The Secret Service is a 2014 film directed by Matthew Vaughn, after having directed the first Kick-Ass movie in 2010, as well as X-Men First Class in 2011. Matthew Vaughn was actually under the assumption that he was
Hey kids, time to talk about more cases of stiff lifting from the days of yore. If you haven't seen part 1 yet, go check it out. Or don't. I'm a YouTuber, not a cop, unfortunately. This first tale doesn't feature an entire dead body, but I still found it interesting enough to talk about. So one day in 2012, a priest was riding a train out of Italy when his bag got stolen by a trio of thieves. Inside the bag was whatever normal personal possessions the guy happened to own, as well as a small vial containing the blood of none other than Pope John Paul II. So this begs the question, why did the priest have Pope blood in his bag? Well, an important way that the Catholic Church honors saints and other venerated individuals is the keeping of relics. These relics are ranked in terms of how close they were to the person at hand. You got something that's tangentially related to a saint in any way, that's a 3rd class relic. If it's a personal possession of a saint, it's 2nd class. And as for 1st class relics, those typically consist of literal body parts and or fluids of a holy figure. Now for you youngsters out there, in 1981 the Pope got shot 4 times by some fascist having a bad day. People are like, holy shit, it's a popicide! Is that even a word? No, I'm okay. Oh. Say, who left all this 1st class relic lying around? So to this day, there remain 3 objects containing the fine-aged popey juice spilled that fateful afternoon. The vial was found a few hours later by police among the reeds and grass near the station, which basically means the thieves took one look at it and were like, blood? I already make this myself. Lame, and tossed it out without a second thought. Here's the thing though, that's not the only instance of old JP2 getting blood napped. In 2014, a similar relic was yoinked from the church of San Pietro della Ienca in Italy alongside a crucifix. The fact that these were the only items taken led to 2 prevailing theories. Some people thought that, since John Paul II wasn't technically a saint yet, the relic's value would go way up once the man was actually canonized, so the thieves decided to take it now and resell it later. The other theory was way more popular with the media. After all, what use does Pope blood have other than satanic rituals? This story naturally got a lot of press, and the whole world just kind of assumed that Lucifer himself was set to return any day now. Eventually, the thieves confessed, so authorities came to the rehab facility they were staying at. They returned the cross, but when questioned about the relic, they were like, wait, what? Pope blood? Satan? Do you guys need to check in here too? Eventually, it was found in a rubbish bin on the facility grounds, which means once again, it was just casually tossed out as nonsense. You ever throw out Pope blood? Because apparently, multiple people have done that on separate occasions just in the past 7 years. It doesn't end there, of course. In 2016, this happened a 3rd time when a piece of cloth with John Paul fluid on it was taken from Cologne Cathedral. I can't for the life of me find a follow-up to this story, which leads me to believe that they're just like, fuck it, Pope blood's more trouble than it's worth at this point. But if you guys can find some conclusion to where it ended up, let me know below. Now, our next story begins with a man named Karl Tanzler, a German-born radiology technologist in early 20th century Florida. He looked kinda like Sigmund Freud, except even more evil looking. On the inside, he was a pretty normal dude, other than the fact that he claimed to have visions throughout his life of some mysterious dark-haired girl. Anyway, in 1930, while working at the Marine Hospital in Key West, he met a young woman by the name of Maria Elena Milagro de Hoyos, called Elena for short, and he said, "Oh my god, that's the girl from the visions I've been having." Yeah, wait, what? "We were meant to meet today. We must be soulmates." What? Don't you have like a wife and 2 kids? Destiny. Hoyos was soon diagnosed with tuberculosis, which was considered fatal at the time, so naturally, Karl decided to handle her treatment, going as far as convincing her family to let him visit their home every day. Except, he was a radiologist, so even if there were reliable means to treat tuberculosis at the time, he definitely didn't have the credentials to do so, but whatever. This is the past we're talking about after all. That place was a shit show from start to finish. I'm not about to get on somebody's case for a little clerical error. In addition to whatever salves and tinctures and such doctors gave to people back then, Tanzler showered her with gifts of clothes and jewelry. I know he meant well, but if I was bedridden with a terminal illness, I'd just be insulted. Like, wow, thanks, can't wait to show off this little number out on the town. Anyway, eventually, Tanzler found that the time had come to reveal his true feelings. "Elena, there's something I must confess. I'm deeply in love with you." "I'm so glad you feel the same." Hoyos inevitably succumbed to the disease, leaving Tanzler heartbroken. He just wasn't ready to part ways with his pestilence-riddled sweetheart, so he asked the family's permission to commission an above-ground mausoleum for their daughter. And since this was the early 20th century, they said, "What a sweet, selfless man. I'm sure he'd never do this just so he could commit crimes against nature." Then he was like, "Oh yeah, by the way, could I have some of her hair too?" "Sure, kind stranger. Here's a bag of her hair we just had lying around for some fucking reason. Again, no red flags here." He went to visit her dwelling nearly every night for 2 years. Then finally one day he said, "You know what, kid? You're alright. Say, how's about we ditch this musty old mausoleum and go back to my place?" I'll take that as a yes. So he took her home in a little red toy wagon, which is ridiculous. It makes me picture him skipping around, whistling a merry tune. "Hey neighbor!" Now here's a riddle for all you intellectuals out there. What do a dead body and a used PT Cruiser have in common? Sure, they both taste terrible, and you never want to be seen in public with one. Most importantly though, they're a depreciating asset. But hey, that didn't stop old gnarly Carly from sprucing her up any way he could. Wiring her bones back together with coat hangers, replacing her skin with wax and silk, making a wig out of that bag of hair from earlier, and soaking the body in massive amounts of perfume and disinfectants, for obvious reasons. He claimed to have been instructed to do all this by Elena's spirit, which he would apparently talk to frequently. He also did, you know, that thing eccentric loners do with dead ladies in their house, but we won't talk about that. This went on for 7 years, 7 hot and humid Florida years, until 1940 when Elena's sister saw him dancing with some lady through the curtains. She's like, "Aw, how cute. I'm glad that old bag of lentils has finally found love." Walks in, comes to find out it's her fucking dead sister. So the cops come, but there isn't any conclusive evidence of any flirting and philandering with the body, so the only crime Karl could have been charged with was grave robbing. Except the statute of limitations was already up by the time he was found out, so they just took the body, tipped their hats, and went on their merry way. Tanzler still missed Elena dearly, but since he couldn't have her cadaver, he crafted a crude homemade effigy of the lady, which he lived with for the rest of his life. Here's the part that really gets me though. He apparently went back to live with his estranged wife once the jig was up. Just like, "Hey babe, I know we haven't talked since the whole corpse thing, but I've been having trouble making rent. Do you think I could come crash for a while?" "Sure, come right in. I'll take your coats. Would you and the demented life-size replica of your long-dead lover that you left me for like a cup of tea?" "I'd like one. None for her though. It goes right through her." Of course, I'm making all this out to be a horrifying thing for the goofs and gaffs of it, but at the time, a lot of people read the news stories about Tanzler, and many actually sympathized with the man. They saw him as the distraught, hapless romantic that he saw himself as. You know why they had that compassion? Because they listened. Say, what would the world look like if we all listened more? Sponsor time! Listening to audiobooks inspires us, motivates us, even brings us closer, and there's no better place to listen than Audible. But what should you listen to, you ask? After at a time. Could you imagine being the first outsider to witness this? You might laugh now, but as they say, everybody gangsta till the nuns start meowing. I'd void my bowels and move to Malaysia without even thinking. Miles more terrifying than this pile of garbage. As you can imagine though, after a while it stopped being scary and just got annoying, leading to the neighbors calling in a band of soldiers to deal with the situation. Hey guys, can we talk to you for a sec about Yeah, that. All due respect, but we have orders to literally beat the hell out of you with whips till you start acting like people again. Sorry, sir. It's just force of habit. Haha, habit. Seriously though, we would rather go to hell for throttling a gaggle of nuns than put up with another minute of your bullshit, caprese? Our next event took place in the parish of Fatima, Portugal in the year 1917. It all started with 3 shepherd children, ages 10, 9, and 7 respectively. They were like, "Greetings, fellow Portugueseites. We've been seeing visions of the Virgin Mary, and she told us to tell you that some real crazy shit's gonna go down in the sky on October 13th. Now, if 3 random farm children started spouting out prophecies to the public today, you'd say, "Ha, what tomfoolery. Go play in some dirt, you dirty little dirt baby." But keep in mind, the past is a different country. And Portugal's a different country, so that's like different country squared you gotta think about. Plus this was during World War I, a time where a lot of people were holding out for a miracle to begin with. So the kid's story was actually picked up and even spread by local newspapers, to the point where, when the day finally came, at least 30,000 people gathered in Fatima to witness the alleged miracle. Lo and behold, on that day, the sun began zooming around, careening towards Earth and sending rays of multicolored light cascading across the sky, creating a light show like nobody's ever seen. Keep in mind, this happened in the 20th century, way after the era where belief in divine jiggery and or pokery was considered mandatory, so naturally there were plenty of skeptics and non-believers present, and even they saw it all happen. Or so they thought. How do we know the sun didn't really whiz around haphazardly that day, Well, number 1, use your frickin' brain. And number 2, accounts differed wildly from person to person. While some say the sun zigged hither, others say it zagged thither, and others still said it shined a brilliant yellow and stayed perfectly still. As such, it was eventually concluded that the event was just a combination of MPI and weird eye stuff from too much sun staring. Although I'd like to believe it was real, just that Jesus' illusion skill was way higher than his alteration at the time. Yep, that's it. Sam's going to hell. Why, for blasphemy? Trust me, that was the least offensive part of that joke. Our next tale took place in 1962 in Tanganyika, which was basically just the beta version of Tanzania. The nation had just declared its independence from Britain the previous year, and with the future so uncertain, tensions were naturally running high around this time. One little girl in a Tanganyikan school ended up handling the stress in a bit of an unusual way. Rather than overeating or staring at her ceiling for hours like a normal person, she just started laughing, and laughing, and laughing. Pretty soon, her classmates at the all-girls school she attended began to join in, to the point where 95 of the 159 students caught the gigglies, which lasted anywhere from a few hours to 16 days straight. Beyond just the unprovoked cackling, other odd behavior included aimless running and occasional violence. The problem got so severe that the school was forced to close down temporarily, leading to the chortlers roaming the streets, spreading the affliction further. Thousands of people from all strata came to be affected, with 13 additional schools being shut down in the progress. Over the course of the hysteria, several other symptoms began to present themselves as well, ranging from obvious ones such as breathing problems, fainting, random screaming, to more anomalous things like rashes. Despite all this, no physical cause could be found, leaving MPI as the only explanation. The epidemic finally died down after between 6 and 18 months of day in, day out laughter, depending on the village. While this whole thing likely sucked for most people involved, it probably could have been worse. A lot of the time when I'm alone, I'll think to myself, man, if I ever go full schizo, I hope I'm one of the laughy ones, not one of the screamy ones. With this story in mind, just maybe, if I put my mind to it and believe hard enough, I can be both. Flashback to the year 1518 to the city of Strasbourg, at the time part of the HRE. A woman named Mrs. Trophy began fervently dancing in the streets for no discernible reason, for hours, then days. All without music, of course. Her only breaks consisted of occasional food intake and passing out from exhaustion when night came. If you saw that today, you'd just be like, ha! Drugs. But apparently people found it pretty inspiring, because within a week, 34 others had joined in, and after a month, there were around 400. This wasn't your casual bobbing up and down neither. This shit made Zumba look like Tai Chi. Here's the best modern day simulation I could find. Now imagine that both of those people were the same person and you got the dancing plague. This would take a toll on any healthy person, let alone a medieval city dweller, but despite bleeding feet and aching bones, they just kept going. In fact, they went so hard for so long that a good portion straight up fucking died from cardiac arrest. It got to the point where around 15 dancers were kicking the bucket every day before the city decided they had to do something about it. They managed to rule out any divine or supernatural causes, which was necessary just because, you know, back in medieval times, it was fucking stupid. They eventually surmised that it was a natural disease caused by too much hot blood, as per that whole four humors thing that was popular at the time. As for a cure, their prescription was, get this, more dancing. I can see where they were coming from. It's pretty sound logic. If you got a song stuck in your head, you play it till you're sick of it, same kind of thing. But here's where they goofed. The authorities actually went out of their way to facilitate the dancing, setting up a big stage area and even hiring musicians to keep the afflicted moving. All this achieved was attracting more passerby who were like, man, mass psychogenic illness looks frickin' epic, let's get in on that, causing the contagion to become even more widespread. Seeing that their solution backfired, the city then went the other way and completely banned any public dancing. Those who still showed signs of the mania were subsequently carted off to the Shrine of St. Vitus, where an exorcism-like ritual was performed on them. This ended up being highly effective, presumably for no other reason than that the dancers believed it would work, and after nearly 2 months, the plague was quelled. While this whole thing was most likely a case of good old-fashioned MPI, some historians believe it might have been egged on in part by ergotism, a state of psychosis brought on by eating tainted bread, which I talked a little bit about in this video. Ding. And hey, while I'm shilling for my channel, I might as well give a shout out to another as well. Today's video is sponsored by Cheddar, a network focused on producing fascinating content covering topics like technology, products, businesses, and the like through the lens of innovation. Here's one about desire paths, you know, like those lines of dead grass from people taking more convenient routes through places. It's one of those things that plenty of us have thought about but never. This video is sponsored by Skillshare. Hey kids, hope you had yourself a merry little whatever. I know I did. What do you like best about the holiday experience? My personal favorite part is where we systemically brainwash children into thinking they're supernatural beings who judge their every move and then invade their house at night. Now, everyone knows Santa, good old Saint Nick, ol' Father Christmas, ol' Christopher Kringle, ol' Elpheus Prime, slayer of elk and bringer of Xboxes. And you've probably heard of some other characters somewhere too. Guys like Krampus, Belsnickel, Charlie Brown, Xi Jinping. Well, today I want to show you guys some more obscure Yuletide beings from different cultures all across the globe, but mostly Europe. Now, this first creature's name comes from the Welsh. As a matter of moral principle, I personally don't formally recognize the Welsh language. Maybe someday they'll figure out how W's and Y's work, then it'll be a different story, but for the time being, you'll have to excuse me for not condoning bullshit like this. So the thing allegedly called Mari Lwyd isn't a true mythical creature per se, but more so a tradition carried out for at least the past few centuries in South Wales. No, I mean Old South Wales. This is how it works. Every holiday season, the village rapscallion will take a horse's skull and affix it to the end of a pole. Kinda like one of these things, except, you know, awful. The skull is typically decorated in some way, and sometimes they put in a lever so you can make the mouth move on its own. Then a white sheet is draped over the pole and its holder, thus giving the illusion that Famine himself has come to destroy all your figgy pudding. From here, one would think that the nightly festivities would include welshing your trousers and repenting for a lifetime of naughtiness, but no, it gets better. You know that whole mouth moving thing? Turns out that's not just for taking wild snaps at the faces of innocent children. The Mari Lwyd and its party of caretakers will go around to random houses and sing a song about wanting to be let inside. The inhabitants are then expected to sing back with excuses as to why they don't want this abomination in their home, all in rhyme of course. This goes back and forth until either the Mari Lwyd gives up, or the party's invited in, at which point they get to raid your pantry and drink all your beer. So if you ever find yourself rap battling a horse skull in South Wales, don't panic. It's normal, I guess. Next we have Frau Perchta, a witch-like being said to visit during the holidays in the Alpine regions of Germany and Austria. Depictions of Perchta can range anywhere between beautiful woman and whatever the hell this is, but usually they fall somewhere in between. She's also sometimes shown with this big weird floppy goose foot. That's because she's apparently real into spinning. Not the 2-foot kind though, the 1-foot kind. It's said that this delightful spinster pays a visit to all the little wiener schnitzels on the 12th night of Christmas. If you were well behaved and hard working this year, she might leave you a small silver coin in your shoe. How kind. But if you've been an inattentive young lady and didn't spin all your flax that year, Perchta will trample all your half-woven fibers as punishment, and you'll say, weird flax, but okay. Fucking cut that out, Jesus. Then there's the stuff Perchta considers especially naughty, which can vary depending on who you ask. If you left your house a mess, or you didn't leave out the traditional bowl of porridge, or maybe you didn't eat your ceremonial fish and gruel on feast day, that's when you've been a real goober. As recompense, she'll rip out your fucking intestines through your abdominal wall and then stuff your empty body cavity with pebbles and straw until you're just as plump as when she started. So, you win some, you lose some. Nobody knows what she does with your freshly harvested innards after she leaves. But being that she lives in the mountains and has an obsession with thread making, I think we can all infer the obvious truth. Of course, no discussion of folklore of any kind can truly be complete without taking a look at Iceland. Between the centuries of isolation and the volcanic fumes constantly spilling out over the countryside, it's no wonder that they're one of the world's biggest exporters of whack-ass mythology. Seriously, according to one 1998 survey, over 54% of Icelandic
and if they decide, like, we really want Rob to be our DCU Batman?
I don't know. Well, we'll have to see where that goes.
Fair enough. I won't put you on the spot anymore. Congratulations. Enjoy this night.
So Robert Pattinson's Batman might actually be the new Batman in the new DCU. Matt Reeves apparently talks about it in this interview with Josh Horowitz. And we have some reports from some scoopers stating the same thing as well. Let's first dive into this interview, then we'll go into the scoops. This is Matt Reeves talking to Josh Horowitz on the red carpet for the Golden Globes. And Matt Reeves is the creator of The Penguin, Batman 1, and is currently writing Batman 2.
So obviously, the audience already has an appetite. We're greedy in a good way. We want more. How many discussions, are there real discussions about season 2 right now?
Yeah. Lauren and Dylan and Colin and I are talking about doing another season, and it's all about. Obviously, we're doing the Batman 2. We want to get the timing right on that. Of course. But our plan is and our hope is absolutely to do another season. We just have to come up with the idea that we think is the right idea, which is what we're working on.
Okay, pause. In the beginning, when they did the Penguin, they said Penguin 2 was on the table, especially Colin Farrell, because of how just hard it was to wear the suit of the Penguin. I mean, he's unrecognizable as the Penguin. I've seen the process of him getting into the costume. I think they said it takes about 3 hours every day. Like, that's hard. And Colin Farrell originally said, yeah, no season 2, just season 1, because they're going to go into the Batman 2. Story's going to kind of continue. He's going to be in it. But originally it seemed like season number 2 was off the table. But now it's clearly on the table. They're clearly talking about it. So it looks like we might be getting a Penguin season 2. Let's continue.
Are you happy with, obviously, the release date change for Batman Part 2?
Yeah.
You want the script to be in a good place?
Of course.
So are you happy with the progress you're making and the release date you have now?
Yes, absolutely. No, this year we're going to be shooting, and I'm very excited about it. And
it's taken,
there's been a lot of stuff going on, and it's taken longer than I would have wanted. But also, I'm super excited about what we're doing. So I really can't wait to share that with everybody.
So how tough has it been to figure out your main villain? There have been a lot of rumors lately of Freeze as a potential villain.
Answer anything.
Like, now you determine who the bad guy is.
Yes, of course. Or we'd really be in trouble.
Is it going to be surprising to the audience?
I hope so. Yeah, I think so. I think that the story is a continuation in a certain way and completely different in another, and is going to show different sides of Rob. Okay. I mean, I think it's going to be really exciting. It's going to be really cool.
Do you pay attention to the rumors out there? Because there are new rumors every single day.
I mean, you just kind of look at them casually and go like, oh, is that what they think now? Oh, interesting. Okay, but it's, you just got to put your head down and do what you do and try and do it as best you can.
And thoughts on other spin-off series at this point for Zoe, for other characters?
I mean, look, I would love to do more, but I think right now the thing that we're really focused on, obviously we're talking about doing the second season of the Penguin, but my big priority is to get the Batman 2 shooting and going, and then it'd be exciting to see where we'll go from there.
And last thing for you, I spoke to James Gunn recently, and I asked him, obviously he talked about, letting you do your Reeves verse on his own. And I did ask him, have you contemplated recently integrating Rob into the DCU? And he said, they've talked about it because you talk about everything.
Sure, yeah.
What's your attitude about that at this point?
I mean, it really comes down to whether or not it makes sense. And, I think what's been great is it was really a kind of a story that I wanted to tell, we're calling the epic crime saga and all of that, which is the thrust of what we wanted to do. And it's been important to me to be able to play that out. Yeah. And, James and Peter have been really, really great about that, and they're letting us do that. And, what the future brings, I can't really tell you. I have no idea right now, except that my head is down now about getting the Batman Part 2 shooting and to make it something really, really special, which, of course, is the most important thing.
And if they decide, we really want Rob to be our DCU Batman?
I don't know. Well, we'll have to see where that goes.
Fair enough. I won't put you on the spot anymore. Congratulations. Enjoy this night.
Well, there you have it right there. It's a possibility, and they've talked about it. James Gunn has talked about it with Matt Reeves. This is now confirmed. It's out there for the entire world. We now know. So If you viewed this as not possible at all and it was just a rumor before, well, this clearly shows right here the rumor has merits. They clearly are talking about whether or not to make Pattinson the main Batman of the new DCU. Now, we do have some other reports right here. One is coming from Jeff Snyder, and he's been pretty good with scoops recently. From what I understand, all of them, if not most of them, have been accurate. He states that James Gunn wants Robert Pattinson to be the DCU Batman and is currently making moves to make sure he gets his way. He says Alexander Skarsgård was the first choice to play Krim in Supergirl, but was too expensive. A source tells Jeff Snyder that Mr. Freeze is in the Batman Part 2. Josh did mention Mr. Freeze. He mentioned, villains, of course. Matt's not going to tell him all of that. He can't tell him.
All right, we can add Mark Zuckerberg to the long list of billionaires who have straight up bent the knee to Donald.
Hey kids, remember the plague, malaria, smallpox? Kinda bad, right? Well, guess what? They're peanuts compared to the level of destruction that's been wreaked over the years across the kingdom next door. Today, I'm gonna talk about some of the most interesting diseases to ever strike the world of plants. The most famous one is probably the potato blight. It's a fungus that attacks potatoes. This is what it looks like. On the left, we have a healthy potato, while on the right, we have a blighty one. Notice how this one is noble and robust, like a lion's heart, while the other is shriveled and black, like Betsy DeVos's uterus. You could try to eat it, but it's basically like rotting cork. You wouldn't get very far. So in 1845, Ireland relied a lot on potatoes, right? That's because their soil was dumb, and that's the most nutritious thing they could grow. Then the blight came, and all their food turned to poo. 1 million starved, 2 million left. They came to America. They brought freckles, and these things. Hoity-toity-toy, now we have the Celtics. Next is the chestnut blight, which infects, you guessed it, the elderly. Wait, no, that's shingles. Chestnut blight infects American chestnut trees, which once populated a huge portion of the South and Mid-Atlantic regions of the country. Key word, once. During the early 20th century, the blight arrived, which ended up killing around 4 billion trees over the course of a couple decades. Hey, remember that time 4 billion giant things died inexplicably? Me neither. Nobody does. Let me give some perspective on the situation. Those trees were huge, like 40 meters tall apiece. That means 160 million kilometers of tree was destroyed by this disease. That's long enough to get from the Earth to the Sun with 10 million kilometers to spare. Here's another. If we take the volume of all these trees, we get 126 billion cubic meters. If we burn that much wood, we get 861 quadrillion joules of energy. That's the amount released by the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, times 10,000. So yeah, kind of a big deal. But who cares, right? Why worry about 4 billion dumb smelly old trees when there's 1,000 whole pandas that need our help? Isn't that right, WWF? You populist scum. Anyway, moving on. This next one is called, get ready, broom rape. I'm serious. Broom rape. Broom rape. Wikipedia, broom rape. Naked broom rape. Imagine if we gave human illnesses names like that. I'm sorry, Sam, but you have urethra cactus. I would just end it right there. Doesn't even matter what the actual symptoms are. Anyway, broom rape is considered a parasitic plant. This is what it does. The seeds of the broom rape will hang out in the soil for years until the roots of a host plant come along. When they do, the broom rape bursts out of its shell and immediately starts leeching off the other organism. Eventually, once they grow enough, they'll breach the surface with these little flowers. Notice, no leaves, no green. Who needs chlorophyll when you're a filthy freeloader, right? These flowers get fertilized and the whole thing starts over. Just one of these guys isn't a big deal to the host, but once you get enough, they have the potential to suck an entire farm dry, causing sweeping crop failure. Pun definitely intended. Next is this one. There's a few different ways you can pronounce it depending on your social standing, ranging from ergit to elgo.
Being the disheveled pauper I am, I prefer ergot, rolls off the tongue, you know. Ergot is a fungus that mainly infects grains like wheat, barley, and especially rye. And it's capable of producing a whole soup of compounds called alkaloids, which can have a variety of effects on the human body. Most of them not fun, mostly spasms and diarrhea, that kind of thing. However, one particular alkaloid called ergotamine structurally resembles LSD and has a similar function when it enters the body. So a medieval peasant would be sitting there, eating a nice loaf of rye bread, just minding his own business. Then all of a sudden, holy shit, I'm blasting out of both ends! My heart's a seizing, my lungs a wheezing, the fucking walls are melting, I can hear Satan's voice. He's telling me to invest in Apple. What does that mean? Why does he want me to buy apples? This would go on for like a day. Sometimes their fingers and toes would fall off, but then they'd be alright. Unless they weren't. Moral of the story, kids, don't eat strange bread. You could trip balls and die. One more thing before we end today's video, I've decided to launch a second channel for all the dumb stuff I think of that doesn't fit the Academy format. It's called Salmonella Vlog. Go check it out. It's in the description. I wrote a slam poem. It's there. Go look. Anyway, that's all for today. Till next time, I'm Salmonella, and thank you for watching.
Before start, press the bell icon so you never miss any videos. Welcome to the late Cretaceous period, Tiny Terror. You've just hatched into the world about 68 million years ago, give or take a few lunches.
Well, they voted to kill Socrates. It's pretty shameful to send a 70-year-old man to the hemlock stand. What does Socrates have to say to the finger pointers? I am speaking now not to all of you, but only to those who have condemned me to death. And I have another thing to say to them. You think that I was convicted because I had no words of the sort which would have...
In the golden age of classical Athens, the average citizen had exactly two fears: the war with Sparta and talking with Socrates. The Spartans at least were outside the city walls, but that wily Socrates was even more terrifying because he could be anywhere. You might be at a party for elite Athenians, walking through the Agora marketplace, or even waiting in line to be put on trial, but as soon as you smelled Socrates coming, you knew you were in trouble. Then, once he stepped barefoot into your line of sight and heard you so much as thinking, this disheveled goblin of a man would delight in dissecting every aspect of your conscience question by question. Why do you hold your opinions? Are you doing enough to be a good person? Are you qualified to know what goodness even means? In the eyes of the Athenian public, Socrates was a vulture, scavenging the city for errant ideas, ready to dive on any offhand comments or boasts of wisdom. Socrates was, by all accounts, profoundly irritating to political bigwigs and self-proclaimed experts, but he was undeniably an upright citizen, having served in the Athenian army on 3 occasions and holding a deep respect for the laws of the city, and the boisterous Athenian youths absolutely loved the guy. Among that bunch, none was more devoted than his student Plato. Born to an aristocratic family in the mid-420s BC, Plato grew up among the leading political elite during the height of the Peloponnesian War, whereupon he bravely ditched any chance of a career in business or politics to instead study philosophy. My hero. Around 387 BC, Plato founded an informal academy on his family estate where Athenians could freely gather to discuss and debate topics from the most ethical and practical to the abstract and theoretical. Plato's academy inspired other philosophical schools across Greece, such as the Lycaon of his student Aristotle, and it remained in use until its untimely destruction in the 80s BC. Long story, blame the Romans. Yet, like many a frustrated Athenian citizen, Plato could never escape Socrates, and Plato's greatest philosophical legacy lies in his Socratic Dialogues, a collection of 30-odd philosophical discussions featuring his beloved mentor. These are not the first written works of philosophy, nor the first to ask big questions about the nature of the world and our place in it, but Plato's approach is so thoroughly systematic and wide-ranging in its treatment of ethics, politics, epistemology, and abstract concepts that we can rightly credit Plato with creating the analytical toolkit of Western philosophy, elevating it from a field of casual inquiry into a defined system of investigation. In short, the man is good, but more than anything else, it's the dynamic between Socrates and Plato which makes these dialogues so darn captivating. To see how, ascandu me philosophia. Now, Plato had studied with Socrates for at least a decade before striking out on his own, and the instigating factor was Socrates dying. Because being a compulsive conversationalist wasn't a crime in ancient Athens, and neither was being annoying, but Socrates was such a profound pain in the ass that 3 Athenians brought him up on charges of impiety and corrupting the youth in the hopes of getting him exiled or killed. And Socrates was so stubborn it worked perfectly. They held a trial, he told them to piss off, they sentenced him to death, he drank the poison, and simple as that, he's on a boat to the river Styx. And after that rather traumatic experience, Plato's outlet for grief and at least a little rage was writing, codifying the memory of his mentor through the activity he loved most, dialogue. At the time, and basically ever since, philosophy was usually written as a treatise where the author talks at you, but Plato instead adapted Athens' local style of theatrical drama. The dialogue format was certainly new and unique, but it's really a philosophy play, so it made perfect sense as a distinctly Athenian mode of philosophy. It also helped solve the issue of Socrates' complete disdain for writing. He loved to talk, but thought that an idea dies as soon as it hits the papyrus. Writing is static. It can't converse. It can't react, but usefully, it also can't drink poison, so Plato was willing to do it anyway. And by writing dialogues instead of treatises, Plato upheld the Socratic ideal of lively debate and, in some cases, preserved actual discussions Socrates likely had. Among the earliest and most famous of Plato's dialogues are the Euthyphro, Apology, and Crito, which depict the trial and imprisonment of Socrates leading to his death in the later Phaedo dialogue. These are a small slice of Plato's total work, but they offer the most dramatic portrayal of Socrates' character and combine into the foundational narrative that all the other dialogues build on. So what does Plato show us? The first dialogue in the series sees Socrates awaiting his trial outside the law court where he meets a man named Euthyphro who's prosecuting his own father for killing a murderer. He knows this is bold of him, but he considers it the pious thing to do. So Socrates asks, what is piety really? And Euthyphro offers some ideas, but Socrates keeps finding problems. So they end up going in a circle without landing on a solid answer. Critically, Socrates isn't being a mean-spirited contrarian, but genuinely wants to find an answer and is willing to defy conventional ideas to get at deeper truths. But the dialogue also asks how Athenians have any right to accuse Socrates of impiety when they themselves can't even define it. This leads right into the apology, which is not apologetic in the slightest, but rather comes from the Greek word for speaking in defense. Here we listen to Socrates' arguments for his innocence against the crimes of impiety and corrupting the youth, as well as a general defense for his philosophical questioning that the Athenians are actually upset about. He compares himself to a gadfly biting a lazy horse, an annoying presence that's necessary to stimulate the Athenians to be better, and declares that even if acquitted, he'll never stop asking questions of people because the unexamined life is not worth living. After his defense, the 501-man jury finds him guilty, and this triggers a fascinating step in the Athenian legal process. After a guilty verdict, the prosecution and the defense each propose a punishment, and the jury votes again. This encourages moderation, so when the prosecution proposed death, the assumption was Socrates would request exile and most likely get it, but instead he doubled down, saying, if you want to know what I deserve, I'll tell you what I deserve. Put me up in the Prytanean and give me free meals for life because I'm doing Athens a service, and that's what I deserve. Naturally, the jury voted for death, but Socrates remained undaunted. The beauty of the language in the Apology is Plato's gift, but that unshakable moral core was all Socrates, and that attitude pervades the next two dialogues. Now, the day before Socrates' trial, a ship left port for a sacred festival on the island of Delos, and until it came back, no executions were allowed to take place. So Socrates stayed in prison for a month until his friend Crito arrives to tell him the ship was spotted off the coast of Sunion and would be back in the city soon after. Crito offers Socrates one last chance to escape, but Socrates refuses on principle. Sure, the guards couldn't care less if he bolted so long as he just left the city, but justice is justice, and Socrates would rather die. In the next dialogue, he sure as hell does. The Phaedo portrays the last conversation with his students about the immortality of the soul before the sun sets and he drinks the poison hemlock. The death is immaculately dramatized as his friends swing between laughing and weeping while Socrates remains calm, serene, and pious to the very end. This is the stuff religions are made of, but Plato leverages the drama of it all to better explore those topics of piety, justice, and death his characters investigate. Now we have an interesting problem here because Socrates is all aboard the immortal soul train in the Phaedo, but earlier in the Apology he explicitly does not know what happens to him after he dies. And that gets to the big question in Platonic philosophy. Where does the historical Socrates end and Plato's character of Socrates begin? The simplest answer is chronological, as Plato's early dialogues hew much closer to how other sources paint the historical Socrates and have more basis in actual conversations, while the later dialogues dialogues see Plato get more inventive, developing Socrates into a character that he can drop in any story and set loose. Early dialogues often have plausible context or full historical precedent like the trial, but middle dialogues like the Republic create whole scenarios and characters for Socrates to bounce off of. We can also distinguish the dialogues by what Socrates is doing in them. The early dialogues typically follow a format of some smarty pants declaring they know something about politics, religion, ethics, or the like, whereupon Socrates exercises carte blanche to ruin this person's whole career, systematically skewering their positions and leaving them as a confused, blubbering mess before carrying happily along with his day. This is the Socrates who Athens wanted dead. However, the middle and late dialogue shows Socrates offering ideas for a change, possibly in line with Plato developing his ideas and delicately weaving them into the texts. Socrates in the latter dialogues takes a more rigorously mathematical approach and has more interest in abstract concepts. He still operates through lines of questioning, but we can clearly see Plato's hand in this version of the character. Looking at the structure of the Republic, Book 1 reads as a standard early dialogue investigating the question of justice and ending with no clear answer, but in Book 2, Socrates puts forward his own definition, using the metaphor of a city's government to illustrate how justice works in a single person, and this discussion drives the subsequent 9 books of the Republic. After several tangents and extra philosophical scaffolding to support the main argument, the metaphor falls apart, but several key ideas make it through intact. Most significant being the theory of forms, the intangible ideals and concepts that govern the universe. These forms are reflected down into mathematics, the physical world, and then images. So this drawing of blue is an image of me, who is an image of humanity, which is itself an image of the concept of life. This is where we glimpse Plato's own philosophy. He never states it outright because he also believes that philosophy is a process rather than a singular truth, but he gives Socrates more and more ideas that survive scrutiny and convince other characters in the dialogues. Those ideas, taken on their own, form an entire corpus of thought that's gone on to inspire secular philosophy and Abrahamic theology for millennia. That all is plenty impressive, but it's not why Plato is the best philosopher. See, the dialogue format isn't just a cute recreation of Socrates' antics or a clever riff on Athenian theater, it's the only way to convey philosophy that meets the Socratic ideal. Plato recognized that text becomes fixed and static once it's written, so his strategy is to make the reader participate with him and Socrates and the other characters. When the Euthyphro ends without an answer on what piety is, that invites the reader to use what they've learned and try their own hand at it, so the dialogue continues in our minds millennia after Plato took his hand off the papyrus. The dialogues leave open questions, so as long as the text is read, the conversation remains alive as we craft our own answers. With the possible exception of Jewish philosophy in the Midrashic tradition, which is a beautiful communal exploration of the Torah unfolding over generations, almost no other Western philosopher does this. Plato's distinctly Athenian innovation is the best mode to convey philosophy, and I'm baffled this isn't the main way we do this. The craft of discussion and the process of investigating our ideas through questions gets us a greater understanding of real-world and theoretical truths. If we read a regular old treatise and just take an author's word for it, we're only coming at the idea from one angle, which then leaves some rhetorical flank exposed for someone like Socrates to rip it apart. But when we use the Socratic method to challenge our ideas, reconfigure, and strengthen them, that's when we approach real wisdom. Now go read a dialogue and start asking some questions. Thank you so much for watching. I first thought of doing this video last summer when I was rereading the Euthyphro and thought, wait, this is, like, really good? There are plenty of other Platonic gems I didn't get to cover, like the Protagoras and the Gorgias, but maybe that just means you should go read them for yourself.
It's a common belief among storytellers that storytelling is the most important facet of humanity, which is a very understandable bias for us to have. And while branding it the absolute pinnacle of human nature might be a bit indulgent, there's something dizzyingly awe-inspiring about the endless chain of tales and legends that links us through 100,000 years of forgotten names and vanished lives. Our roots run deep and dark through the forgotten places of history, stories so old we don't even realize how old they are. Some of those stories are stellar. In many places around the world, the Pleiades star cluster is referred to as the Seven Sisters, which is noteworthy because only 6 stars are visible, and in the myths, one of the 7 sisters is typically missing, dead or abducted or hiding in shame, leaving the other 6 behind. What's interesting is that there actually are 7 stars in the Pleiades, but 2 of them have drifted so close together that they cannot be distinguished with the naked eye. How does the myth know that there were once 7 sisters and that their number has been reduced? Well, there was a time when there were 7 visible stars in the Pleiades, 100,000 years ago. So maybe the story knows that they went from 7 to 6 because the the story is 100,000 years old. Some of these stories describe a world that no longer exists. Australian Aboriginal mythology and folklore often warns of giant, dangerous creatures that align very, very closely with the megafauna that used to roam its plains, like the Diprotodon, megafauna that's been extinct for 40,000 years. Rock art in the region depicts marsupial lions that have been extinct for a brisk 30,000 years. It's very cool to catch glimpses of the truly staggering longevity of storytelling, but unfortunately these cases are the exception and not the rule. While the lineage of many myths and legends can be theoretically traced back thousands of years to key events in the archaeological record that may have shaped them, it's the nature of stories to change with every telling, which is why searching for crisp historicity in ancient legends is a recipe for madness. The evolution of stories is very similar to biological evolution. It's often the odd little consistencies across a seemingly unrelated menagerie that let us identify and trace back a lineage, and just like in biology, in the grand scheme of storytelling, almost everything is lost. We might want to find or reconstruct the original version of these ancient tales, searching for those truly ancient stories, but the original is gone, shattered into the branches of a family tree with the vast majority of its defining narrative lost forever, only scraps and hints and fragments cluing us into what shape the common narrative ancestor might have once taken. The great tragedy of this kind of research is that sometimes things are just gone. Paleolithic cave paintings are eroded away by wind and water. The key historical details in a legend are lost when the teller doesn't think them interesting enough to pass along to the next generation. A civilization's records are miraculously preserved, but the language they're written in dies out, and so the knowledge dies with them. Geological upheaval buries a city under 100 meters of rock, and within 200 years nobody remembers its name. Storytelling may not be the most important thing humanity is responsible for, but it is alive, and like all alive things, it dies very easily. This is why it is truly, genuinely incredible that we have the Epic of Gilgamesh. Before 1853, the Epic of Gilgamesh was a pile of broken pottery in an Assyrian ruin. Before 1872, it was a pile of broken pottery in the basement of the British Museum. It wasn't until Assyriologist George Smith translated the cuneiform in the Flood Tablet, which would later be known as Part 11 of the Epic of Gilgamesh, that it became clear that there was a story here, a coherent written narrative older than anything anyone had found before. It was only a fragment, but it told an epic tale of a cataclysmic flood very similar to the one in the Tanakh, and they still had a lot of broken pottery to go. There is no single complete version of the Epic of Gilgamesh. The oldest stories about him we have access to are Sumerian from the 18th century BCE, where his exploits were literally used as writing homework for scribes, which is why we have about 5 million copies of them. In these poems, Gilgamesh is called Bilgamesh, and while a few details from the overall epic show up, like Enkidu being Gilgamesh's best friend and Gilgamesh overall being a totally badass king, it doesn't have a whole lot to do with the epic, and it's clear that there was basically a corpus of episodic folklore about Gilgamesh popular in the cultural consciousness long before his story was consolidated into the epic. There was also clearly a prototypical version of the Epic of Gilgamesh in cultural circulation before it was locked down by the poet and scribe Sinlique Unini somewhere between the 13th 13th and 11th century BCE, when he wrote down what is now considered to be the standard version of the Epic of Gilgamesh, or as it was called at the time, He Who Saw the Deep. Now, 3,000 years of wear and tear on the tablets has left the story somewhat fragmented, but because this tale was so popular in various forms, new tablets with chunks of the Epic of Gilgamesh are being discovered all the time. Every new translation is more complete than the previous ones because it has more to work from. This is the rare, beautiful case where a lost story was rediscovered, and instead of being half a fragment of a scrap of an oblique reference with absolutely no hope of recovery, it was literally an entire saga. We've known about this epic, the oldest known work of literature, for less than 200 years. A combination of luck and skill and some very, very determined archaeologists have given us back something we could have very easily lost forever. And part of what makes the Epic of Gilgamesh so interesting is that its own narrative themes apply to it on a metatextual level. The Epic of Gilgamesh, a legend that was dead and forgotten for 2,000 years, is a story about death, legacy, and immortality. So let's talk about it. The story begins with a glowing attestation of the beautiful and magnificent city of Uruk, and an equally glowing description of Gilgamesh, a great hero king, unbelievably huge, powerful, and strong, most likely in large part because he is 1/3 man, 2/3 god. However, despite being a great king, Gilgamesh is kind of a terrible person, harassing the young men of his city in some unspecified way and harassing the young women in a very specified way. The gist is that when a young woman gets married, she spends her wedding night with Gilgamesh first and her actual husband second. This is not a great arrangement for anyone but Gilgamesh, and the women of Uruk are just about sick of it, so they petition the gods for help. The gods roll up and deliberate what to do about Gilgamesh being a huge turbo tyrant, and eventually they decide the only logical solution is to create Gilgamesh's equal, someone who can stand up to him and make him chill out. The goddess Aruru, creator of humanity, shapes some clay into a massive and powerful wild man called Enkidu, an absolute and literal beast who spends his days in the wilderness with the animals, causing problems for the local hunters, which means the number of unstoppably powerful demigods causing problems for innocent locals has changed from 1 to 2. Good work, team. The hunters try and figure out what to do about this huge monster man that keeps wrecking their traps and freeing their prey, and they settle on the creative solution of calling in an expert on getting men to behave, the legendary prostitute Shamhat, whose reputation turns out to be well-earned because after engaging Enkidu for an entire week, the man has somehow learned language, showering, social skills, table manners, and how to immediately go at it for another week. In between completing her Tarzan speedrun any percent, Shamhat tells Enkidu about the legendary king Gilgamesh, and he catches wind of Gilgamesh's abuses of power, and immediately resolves to go and fight him 1v1. Enkidu and Shamhat head to Uruk, and the people marvel at this strange, wild man, animalistic in nature, but just as strong and powerful as Gilgamesh himself. As Gilgamesh makes his way to the newest newlywed in town, Enkidu blocks his path and challenges him to single combat. They fight, and while the details of their clash are obscured by damage to the tablet, when the signal fuzzes back in, Gilgamesh and Enkidu stop fighting, kiss, decide to be best friends for life, and then Gilgamesh introduces Enkidu to his mom, officially setting the first world record for the enemies to lovers trope, which has yet to be surpassed. A couple lines later, Gilgamesh decides on a whim that he wants to go and kill a big monster, a terrifying fire-breathing creature by the name of Humbaba. And when Enkidu asks why the hell they would do that, Gilgamesh calls him a wuss and goes to do it anyway. Absolutely nobody can dissuade Gilgamesh from this idea, so the two of them gear up and head to the forest of cedar that Humbaba guards. On the way, Gilgamesh has a series of scary symbolic nightmares, but every time he gets freaked out, Enkidu manages to explain why the scary symbolic nightmare is actually a good thing, and I'd love to give you more details about what the dreams were and how they could possibly be good, but sorry, tablet busted, who dis? All that matters is the boys make it to the forest of cedar, catch Humbaba's trail, and square up with him. Humbaba talks a little smack, Gilgamesh gets nervous, Enkidu affectionately calls him a wuss, and they fight, and with the help of a little bit of divine intervention, courtesy of Gilgamesh's goddess mom, Humbaba is pinned down by the wind so Gilgamesh can slay him. Enkidu briefly worries that killing a monster created by the gods might upset the gods a little bit, I'm sure that won't come back later. Or immediately! When the boys make it back to Uruk with a ton of high-quality cedar wood in tow, Gilgamesh gets himself cleaned up after his long and arduous journey and is immediately ambushed by the goddess Ishtar, who thinks he's really hot and wants to marry him. Gilgamesh enumerates a large number of reasons he's not going to do that in the form of a list of all of Ishtar's exes that have suffered various horrible fates, and Ishtar gets really upset and storms back to the heavens in a rage. She asks her parents, Anu and Antu, if she can borrow the Bull of Heaven and have it kill Gilgamesh, and makes it clear that her alternative plan is to smash down the gates of the underworld and raise up the dead so they devour the living. Rather than dealing with the paperwork of an ancient Mesopotamian zombie apocalypse, Anu gives her the Bull of Heaven and she unleashes it on an unsuspecting Uruk. It's an absolute nightmare of a monster, with its very presence boiling the rivers and cracking the earth, but Enkidu and Gilgamesh manage to defeat it through the cunning strategy of hitting it really hard. They sacrifice various parts of the bull to various different gods, throw a party, and go to sleep. Job well done, boys. Unfortunately, Enkidu dreams that a council of the gods convenes to discuss how Enkidu and Gilgamesh can be punished for killing not one but two sacred creatures crafted by the gods. The gods agree that one of them should die for it, and unfortunately for Enkidu, the reluctant consensus, even among the gods that like them, is that Gilgamesh is a lot less disposable than Enkidu. He wakes up heartbroken, knowing that his death is inevitable and coming soon to a civilization near you. While Gilgamesh tries to petition the gods to spare him, Enkidu privately breaks down and laments to Shamash the sun god, cursing the hunter and Shamhat that took him away from his peaceful, ignorant, wild existence and doomed him to a life weakened by civilization and knowledge, forcing him to forever be lesser than his great friend. Shamash gently chastises him for cursing the people that gave him his life and his friendship with Gilgamesh, and Enkidu calms down a little. So to make up for cursing Shamhat, he turns around and blesses her to be incredibly home-wreckingly hot and have a lot of great boning for the rest of her life. Despite his little moment of closure, Enkidu's not resting peacefully quite yet. He has a second dream where a terrifying lion birdman attacks him and drags him into the sunless underworld where he's paraded before a menagerie of death gods. When he wakes up, he's sick, and his illness worsens over the next 12 days. On his deathbed, Enkidu tells Gilgamesh that he feared dying in battle, but he now wishes he'd at least had the fame and glory of a violent death. A slow, lingering illness brings him nothing at all. Enkidu dies, and Gilgamesh is heartbroken. He commissions a massive statue of Enkidu, drains his treasury to commission sacrifices for the gods so that they'll favor Enkidu, and ultimately spirals into a full-blown existential crisis. In this state, Gilgamesh leaves Uruk and sets out for the farthest reaches of the world in search of a legendary man named Utnapishtim, who along with his wife are the only people who have ever become immortal. Gilgamesh makes his way through the wilderness, still quite powerful, but now also quite frightened thanks to his rolling existential crisis. So he's still defeating lions with his bare hands, but now he's sad about it. He reaches the Twin Mountains where the sun rises, guarded by 2 scorpion men who let him pass when he tells them he's seeking Utnapishtim. He travels through the dark, sunless void for 12 double hours before he finally emerges into a strange garden of stone and crystal trees at the edge of a vast ocean. An old goddess directs him to the boatman that can take him to Utnapishtim, a man named Urshanabi currently working in a forest with a large group of strange stone men. But Gilgamesh interprets her directions as instructions to fight Urshanabi and the stone men, which makes the process of getting to Utnapishtim extra complicated, because the stone men Gilgamesh smashes to bits are the people who are supposed to be manning the dang boat. Urshanabi and Gilgamesh end up having to man it themselves, including a rather perilous section where they need to pull the boat through a band of deadly water and improvise a sail out of their own clothes. But Gilgamesh finally lands unscathed on the far shore and meets Utnapishtim, who is very unimpressed with him. Gilgamesh asks Utnapishtim how he acquired immortality, and Utnapishtim tells him the tale. A long, long time ago, Utnapishtim lived in the great city of Shudapak, where one night the god Ea came to him in a dream and told him to forsake his house, abandon his wealth, and build an enormous boat, filling it with everything needed for life to survive. Ea does not elaborate why this is necessary, but helpfully provides him with a cover story for this apparent madness. If anybody asks, Utnapishtim has somehow incurred the wrath of the god Enlil, a notoriously volatile god of wind and storms, and so Utnapishtim has to go live in Ea's oceanic realm. Ea also says that he can tell the others that soon Shudapak will experience a rain of plenty, a shower of bread cakes, and a torrent of wheat. Ea's suspicious caginess and oddly meteorological metaphors clearly alarm Utnapishtim because he obeys without question, emptying his treasury and sacrificing his livestock to ensure his workmen are very richly compensated for building the massive ark as quickly and as well as possible. Utnapishtim loads up the boat with his family, some workmen and artisans, and a whole bunch of animals. On the day Ea warned him of, he seals the hatch, and the rain begins to fall. A deluge unlike any other drowns the city and drives the gods up into Anu's realm, most of them grieving the destruction and the death of humanity. After 7 days, the rain finally stops, and Utnapishtim cracks the hatch to survey the terrain. The outlook is not good. There's ocean as far as the eye can see, and only the highest mountain peaks are visible as tiny, barren islands. He grounds the ship on one of them and starts sending out birds to look for livable land, and after 2 failures, he releases a raven that flies far enough to see the waters receding. Utnapishtim makes a sacrifice to the gods, and being basically the only human alive and currently praying, all the gods turn up, including Enlil, who the other gods are none too pleased with, because it turns out Enlil is the one who came up with this dumb flood plan himself to try and fix overpopulation, and somehow convince the other gods to be sworn to secrecy about it. Enlil is furious that Utnapishtim survived, but Ea calls him a dingus for orchestrating this whole unnecessarily dramatic debacle, and Enlil calms down. He takes Utnapishtim and his wife and declares that they are now immortal like the gods, and decrees that they'll live far away from the rest of the world at the source of all rivers. So Utnapishtim and his wife are whisked away to this beautiful and alien land, and that brings them to today. Since Gilgamesh doesn't have the option of surviving a cataclysmic flood and convening every god in the world to talk about it, he's not entirely sure what he's supposed to take from this, so Utnapishtim tells him if he wants to conquer death, he's gonna have to start by conquering sleep. He challenges Gilgamesh to stay awake for 7 nights, which Gilgamesh declares to be child's play before immediately passing out. When he's eventually nudged awake, he insists it was only a brief doze, only to see that Utnapishtim's wife has helpfully baked him a fresh loaf of bread for every day he was asleep. There are 7 of them in total, 5 of which have become completely inedible. This is very disheartening for Gilgamesh, and while Utnapishtim won't give him a do-over, he does take pity on the poor guy and cheers him up with a nice hot bath and a makeover to get all the depression gunk off him. He also kicks out his boatman, presumably so nobody else winds up on his front lawn with delusions of grandeur. As Gilgamesh and the boatman go to leave, Utnapishtim gives Gilgamesh one more option potion to stave off the Reaper, a rare plant found under the ocean that restores the youth to anyone who eats it. Gilgamesh immediately dives in and finds it and plans to bring it back to Uruk and test it on some random old guy before downing it himself, but then he leaves it unattended and a snake eats it. Womp womp. With Gilgamesh's pursuit of immortality officially completely pointless and with no way back to Utnapishtim or the plant, he despondently returns to Uruk, and the story ends the way it began, with a description of the wonder and majesty of this great city, far greater than the life of any one man. There is something incredibly poignant about reading this story almost 5,000 years after its historical setting. If the historical Gilgamesh who ruled Uruk sometime between 2900 and 2350 BCE truly suffered the memento mori crisis that his fictional counterpart did, then it's a strange form of immortality he's found himself in. One, like Utnapishtim, granted by no action of his own, but by the choices of a group he had no power over. The people of Uruk told his stories for 1,000 years after his death before they were codified in the tablets we have now, a distant, abstracted immortality very far away from the world of the living. Gilgamesh could not have an immortal life, but when he gazes on Uruk and sings its praises in the final lines of the tablet, he hints at the immortality he will inadvertently achieve. He was terrified of death, but when he stopped running from it and returned to the city he lived to protect and rule, he became a king worth immortalizing, worth telling stories about for 2,000 years, stories then worth recovering and translating 2,000 years after that. Immortality is memory and legacy and history. It isn't outrunning death, it's outlasting it. Storytelling may not be the most important thing humanity's ever done, but it is how we share the gift of immortality with the people and stories that we love. And in a very real way, it's an honor to carry that on. But while we're talking retellings, look, I couldn't give less of a shit about the Fate franchise, but it drives me up the fucking wall that this is their design for Gilgamesh. This gold-plated broomstick? 2/3 god with a 6-cubit stride? You're telling me it's not this beefy muscle man? You're telling me that is supposed to be Alexander the Great? Who did all of his best work before he was 25? It's a rare treat for the Fate franchise to have designs that even come close to making sense, but these designs would actually kind of work if you just switched them, and instead they did this, and I hate it. I hate it so much. I can't believe they do this to me. What have I become? My sweetest friend.
ये क्या हुआ भाई? यूपी में एक आदमी भीख मांगने आया और घर की औरत चुरा के ले गया। हाँ, उत्तर प्रदेश की कहानी है। यहाँ पर आदमी आया भीख मांगने और घर में जो औरत भीख लेने गई थी उसको उससे प्यार हो गया और उसको भगा कर ले गया। औरत 6 बच्चों की माँ थी। कटोरा लेके आया था, टोपी पहना के चला गया। ये क्या हुआ भाई? यूपी
क्या ये सच में मूवी का सीन है या फिर इसे अलग से शूट किया गया है? क्योंकि इट डज नॉट फील लाइक ये टॉक्सिक मूवी का कोई सीन है। पर चलो एटलीस्ट इन्होंने अपने बर्थडे पीक को किसी टीजर ट्रेलर का नाम देकर आपको धोखा तो नहीं दिया। इट्स जस्ट एन अनाउंसमेंट, अ ड्रॉप, अ पीक, स्पेशली अपने एक्टर के बर्थडे के लिए कि पार्टी चल रही है बहुत भयंकर, पूरा रेड कारपेट का इवेंट है, हीरो एंट्री मार रहा है और अय्याशों की तरह माहौल बना हुआ है, कोई भी हाथ इधर पीछे नहीं खींचेगा। पहली नजर में ही अपने अनाउंसमेंट देखकर मुझे फील हुआ कि बेबी लॉन वाली चीज तो नहीं ना शुरू हो रही है, जैसा वहां पे पार्टी सीक्वेंस शुरू होता है और वो बहुत वाइल्ड जाता है, क्योंकि क्रेजीनेस इधर भी हो रही है एंड इंडिया में भी ऐसी पार्टीज चलती थी। आई मीन अपने सिनेमा जगत से ही ऐसी पार्टीज चलती थी, बस डिफरेंस ये था कि हमें वो चीजें देखने को बहुत ज्यादा नहीं मिली, वरना हरामी लोग इधर भी एग्जिस्ट करते हैं। जहां कुछ नहीं तो कुछ हमें इससे मूवी की विजुअल क्वालिटी के बारे में अंदाजा सा लगता है, क्योंकि मैं अभी भी नहीं मानूंगा कि ये बर्थडे का पीक वाला जो भी फुटेज है उससे हमें मूवी की कोई एक्चुअल सिनेमेटोग्राफिक के बारे में पता चलता है। जहां प्रोडक्शन क्वालिटी और मूड तो इन्होंने भले ही बता दिया हो, पर जो एक्चुअल एस्थेटिक होता है मूवी का, जिसे देखकर फील आती है कि ओफ क्या सिनेमैटिक है ये, वो नहीं ऐसा इससे फील होता। जहां टॉक्सिक मूवी के डीपी हैं राजीव रवि, एंड इन्होंने गैंग्स ऑफ वासेपुर, डेवडी एंड हाल ही में महाराज जैसी मूवीज में आर्टिस्टिक डिसीजन लिया है कैमरा के साथ, एंड बंदे का काम बहुत ही क्रीमी है, एंड उसी की तुलना में कोई हार्ड जजमेंट जैसा नहीं है। ये बर्थडे पीक ऐसा फील होता है कि कोई टीवी के लिए इसे शूट किया गया है, स्पेशली वन ऑफ दोस कॉन्डम एड्स होते हैं ना जिसमें काफी चीजें सच चलती हैं, तो इधर भी वही हो रहा है। बाकी इट्स सुपर ऑब्वियस कि दे डोंट वांट टू शो एनीथिंग फ्रॉम द एक्चुअल फिल्म, एंड इट्स जस्ट अ कमर्शियल फॉर टॉक्सिक मूवी, जिसे रिलीज होने में भी बहुत टाइम है जब एक्चुअल मटेरियल आएगा। वेयर द बर्निंग क्वेश्चन इज कि क्या ये सही मायनों में मैच्योर ऑडियंस के लिए अपना प्रोडक्ट होगा, क्योंकि वो आपको एक फील तो देके जा रहे हैं, जैसा वो अपने हर एक पोस्टर, हर प्रमोशनल मटेरियल में बताते आ रहे हैं कि अ फेरी टेल फॉर ग्रोन अप्स। ये इनकी टैगलाइन है मूवी के साथ जुड़ी हुई, जिसमें अब ध्यान दो, मैच्योर सिनेमा का ये मतलब नहीं होता है कि खून खराबा या गाली गलौज का बहुत इस्तेमाल किया गया है, जो कि हाल फिलहाल में इंडियन मूवीज में मेन स्ट्रीम होता देखने को मिल ही रहा है, जस्ट लाइक मार्को, एनिमल एंड बैड एज रवि कुमार। लेकिन वो सिर्फ दिखाने वाली मैच्योरिटी है। आपको अगर असली डीप वाली मैच्योरिटी, लेयर्ड वाली जाननी है, तो द बैटमैन एक बहुत ही अच्छा मॉडर्न टाइम्स में एग्जांपल है कि बिना एक्सेसिव वॉयलेंस या एक्सट्रीम में जाए हुए भी ये आपको फील करा देता है कि बच्चों के लिए तो पिक्चर नहीं है। अब वैसे ही मैच्योरिटी मैं एक्सपेक्ट करता हूं, जो कि काफी लेयर्ड। खैर अब जब वो आएगा तब देखने को मिलेगा, बहुत ही ज्यादा इसके ऊपर माथाफोड़ी नहीं करेंगे, लेकिन ये बात तो जरूर से है, जो ऑरा यश खुद के साथ लेकर आते हैं, जब वो आएंगे तो मतलब बनेगा माहौल, फिर से रॉकी बाई से शुरू होगा मामला इसमें। एंड थैंक गॉड इसमें वो इनोसेंट नहीं है, कोई चाइल्डहुड ट्रॉमा नहीं है, वी होप, एंड कोई गोल्ड माइन वाली बकलोली नहीं है, सिर्फ बदमोशी होगी कोई गैंगस्टर वाली। जिसमें अब सबसे बेस्ट बात क्या है कि दिस वाज डायरेक्टेड बाय अ वुमन, तो एवरीवन जस्ट वांट टू एक्सपेक्ट कि जो सीन्स इन्होंने मूवी के लिए इंटेंट किए हुए हैं उनका कोई पर्सनल एक्सप्लेनेशन तो उनका होगा ही, क्योंकि लोग पूछेंगे कि मत तो उनका समझ में आता है कि उस तरीके से करते हैं, कमर्शियल एंगल भी है, अलग चीज है, पर आप भी मैं वो इंटरव्यू जरूर सुनना चाहूंगा जब वो चीजों को एक्सप्लेन करेगी। बहरहाल बहुत माथाफोड़ी भी अभी इस पे करने में कोई फायदा नहीं है, वैसे भी टीजर है नहीं मूवी का, अलग से बर्थडे पिक शूट किया हुआ है, तो जब एक्चुअल मटेरियल आएगा तो इसकी फील से हटके ऑब्जेक्टिवली मूवी के बारे में देखा जाएगा। बाकी फील की बात करें तो सही ही मैं ऐसे बोलूंगा। बाकी अब अगर आपको कुछ ऐसे वाइल्ड एस पार्टीज के बारे में मतलब देखना ही है, क्योंकि याद आ ही गया था इस बर्थडे पीक को देखकर, तो मैं आपको बेबीलोन मूवी जरूर से रेकमेंड करूंगा, उसे जरूर से चेकआउट करना। बहुत ही अंडररेटेड पीस ऑफ सिनेमा है, और ऐसी बात नहीं है कि ऐसी पार्टीज इधर नहीं होती थी, इधर भी होती थी। मैंने कुछ फोटोज इंटरनेट पे देखी हुई हैं। बाकी इसके टीज के बारे में बात करें, ये बर्थडे पीक के बारे में, अनाउंसमेंट के बारे में, तो सही था।
All Horses videos are available early, ad-free, and uncensored on Patreon. Patrons also get access to exclusive videos, merch giveaways, and more. Check it out at patreon.com/horsespt. Horses is an independent creative project that relies on the support of viewers like you. Thank you. Vladimir Nabokov's book Lolita is a story of abuse, misinformation, and unfathomable cruelty. But so often the work has been interpreted, manipulated, and maligned in a way to distance it remarkably from the original source material. Whether you have read Lolita or not, examining the book and its long-standing cultural impact is a tremendous exercise. It is a case study in how we manipulate media, how media can manipulate us, and beneath all of that, we can find the true horror of Nabokov's novel.